And I need to let board members know that we are trying the closed caption live transcription feature tonight to enable more members of the public to attend. I think at the bottom of your screen where you say CC live transcript, I think you may be able to turn that off if it gets distracting for you. Shane, I see there's someone in the participants with a hand up. I'm going to ask them real quick if I can help. I have a person out there called Dan B. Did you want to say something real quick?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to tell you that I was here and I do want to speak tonight.
Oh, there will be plenty of opportunity at the public hearing time.
Thanks.
You bet.
I'll take my hand off.
Okay, it's looking like we're a minute after 6 here. I'm trying to make a count of planning board members. Staff, how are we looking?
Right now, who am I missing? I think we're all here. Is Rick here? I think I saw him earlier.
I'm here.
Yes, very good. Looks like we're ready to go when you are.
Okay, sounds good. So I will call to order this January 15th, 2022 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. And can we start with roll call, please, Donna?
Certainly. I heard from Josh Schrader earlier today, and he's not feeling well and won't be attending. Ellie Costello.
Present.
Ellie Costello is present. Toon Pham.
Present.
Toon Pham is present. Dory Galels.
Present.
Dory Galels is present. Sierra Farmer.
Present.
Sierra Farmer is present. Micah Sewell.
Present.
Micah Sewell is present. Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Rick Hall.
Present.
Rick Hall is present. Shane Morrissey.
Present.
Shane Morrissey is present. Sean McCoy.
Here.
Sean McCoy is present. Mr. Chair, I have 8 members and 1 alternate present. Would you like to appoint Ms. Farmer as a regular voting member tonight?
Please.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Real quick before we jump into everything, I just want to let everybody know, planning board members and staff, that I am on vacation with my family. And so my normal internet connection is not what it is typically. So if there is any overwhelming lags, delays, or internet interruptions, Shane and I have discussed this, and I will just turn over chairing the meeting to him. However, to start out with, I would like to be here and serve as my normal role. So if there is any issues for staff or presenters or planning board as far as a lag goes, please don't hesitate to say anything. Just jump right in there and say, let me know, and we can make that transition over to Shane. And with that little part, we're going to move on to the next line item on the agenda, which is approval of the minutes from the January 18th, 2022 Planning Board meeting. And we'll just put that to a vote. Hopefully everybody had an opportunity to look those over. And so all those in favor of approving the January 18th meeting minutes, say
I need a
aye.
motion first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Out of practice.
I can make a motion to approve the minutes from January 18th and February 1st, the training session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dory. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Shane. And now we will move to a vote, and we'll just do a yay or nay vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, unanimous approval. Which brings us to the next line item on the agenda, which is public comment on items not on the agenda tonight. So this is public comment for anything outside of our discussion tonight. For those of you that are watching this on some type of device, Donna just put up information how you can call in or sign in or wave in, and I will read out for those who might just be listening or want to call in on their cell phones. So if you're attending by phone, the number, or want to attend by phone, the number is 1-253-215-8782. If you are using a landline and want to call in, it is 1-888-475-4499. The webinar ID is 842-9399-6424. I'll read that one more time. Webinar ID is 842-9399-6424. The password is 999636. And if you would like to raise your hand, press *9. And to mute and unmute, it is *6. And for those folks who might be watching on one device and calling in on another device, whether it's your landline or cell phone, please keep in mind that there will be an echo and that you need to mute or turn off the device that you're watching or we will hear that background noise, and also be prepared for a delay. Sometimes there's a delay when you're calling in. So we will take just a minute here. I think we have a really full agenda tonight. So I'm going to give just a minute and a half for folks who want to comment on something outside of tonight's agenda meeting. And I'm actually going to time this tonight. I'm anticipating a long meeting, folks. Okay, not seeing anything at this time for public comment on this portion of the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and move on with the agenda to the next portion, which is staff announcements, which we have none of. So we will move on from that rather quickly to the public hearing section of the meeting. And tonight we are looking at the Riverview Subdivision and Rezone at 1923 River Road. And we have Alex Eidemann, Senior Planner with the City of Missoula, who will be making our first presentation to us of the evening. Alex, it's all yours.
Thank you. Can you see my screen okay and hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the intro. Just again, my name is Alex Eidemann. I'm a planner with Community Planning Development and the Innovation Department with Development Services at the City of Missoula. And we're here this evening to review a request from Joe Dennert with IMEG Corporation on behalf of Robert and Colleen Anderson, the property owners, for a 19-lot major subdivision and rezoning from the current zoning district RT10 residential to RT 5.4. And this is all taking place at the current property address of 1923 River Road. So this is a subject property location. River Road is just to the north and adjacent to the property. Further north of that kind of big picture, you can see we have the Clark Fork River, and then on the west side is the red line, that's Reserve Street. And to the right, we have Russell, so it's kind of centrally located in that area. This property is part of City's Ward 6 and the River Road Neighborhood Council. Here is an existing conditions exhibit. As we can see, there is existing detached house and an existing detached shed, both of which will be removed if this subdivision is approved. And the existing lot is roughly 2.38 acres. And so again, most of the images will be turned. So River Road is going to be on the left in the most case, and that's going to be north. So that's kind of the site orientation that we'll run through. And so here is the preliminary plat that is proposed for the subdivision and rezoning. There are 19 proposed lots, all ranging from around 4,300 square feet to 4,560 square feet. Access to the subdivision will be provided from River Road, which again is on the left-hand side. And then this proposed new road is going to be currently identified as Road A through the main component of the subdivision. Improvements to River Road along the street frontage adjacent to the parcel are proposed. And Road A is a new proposed low-density local residential street, public right-of-way that would provide access again to all 19 lots in the subdivision. So generally, the applicant requests 4 variances. One is for right-of-way width and street specifications on Road A. One is for cul-de-sac and turnaround streets. One is for the block length, and one is for the right-of-way width on River Road. So I'm going to kind of go into just subdivision review criteria, which addresses compliance with zoning and the growth policy and the impacts of the subdivision on agriculture, agricultural water user facilities, local services, the natural environment, wildlife and wildlife habitat, and lastly, public health and safety. So the land use designation is residential medium density. It's kind of that generally large yellowish area on the slide. The subject property is outlined in the white areas. So residential medium density emphasizes 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre. It's intended to fit within many established residential neighborhoods and acknowledges single dwelling residential building types as the primary use with potential for accessory units. The current relatable zoning districts for this land use designation is the current zoning, which is RT10. There's RT8, which is residential, R5.4, and there's also the RT 5.4, which is the requested zoning change for this property. So the housing policy goals emphasize equity in land use by ensuring that every neighborhood in Missoula participates in addressing the city's housing issues, and that housing affordability connected to the ability to achieve more compact development patterns. So that's kind of, again, general review of residential medium land use designation. Other general land uses in the area south of the subject property in green is a residential medium high land use. So generally you'll see higher densities or allowed at higher densities in that area. To the east of the subject property in this reddish orange area is community mixed use. And then this green open parks and open land is going to be correlated with the Clark Fork River. So the current subject zoning, again, it's outlined in red. This general gray area is all RT10 residential 2-unit townhouse zoning district, what the property is currently zoned. This allows for detached houses, lot line houses, 2- and 3-unit townhouses, 2-unit houses as well, or otherwise known as a duplex, and mixed-use residential building. The RT10 zoning district requires a minimum parcel size of 10,000 square feet, and 10,000 square feet is required per unit for single-purpose residential and mixed use. The subject property is 2.37 acres, which would currently allow 10 dwelling units at a density of 4 dwelling units per acre. And there's just some other kind of, again, it's largely RT10 in this zoning district. And then to the south of the subject property, we have RM 2.7, which is another residential zone. So the proposed zoning, RT 5.4, which is residential 2-unit townhouse. That's the proposed zoning, which also permits detached houses, lot line houses, 2-unit townhouses, 2-unit houses, and mixed-use building residential uses. The RT 5.4 zoning district requires a minimum parcel size of 5,400 square feet, and 5,400 square feet is required per unit for single-purpose residential and mixed use. However, the minimum parcel area requirements does not apply to lots created through subdivision approved under state law after May 6th of 2019, which would be the case if this subdivision is approved. So instead, total unit yield is calculated based upon the gross parcel area divided by the minimum parcel area per unit. So with that said, the subject property again is 2.37 acres, which would allow 19 dwelling units at a density of 8 dwelling units per acre. So the next criteria to address for subdivision review is agriculture. The Natural Resource Conservation Services soil survey for Missoula County states the subject property is 100% identified as 114 urban land, which is not prime farmland if irrigated, or land of agricultural importance. The next criteria is agricultural water user facilities. So as you can see off on the right-hand side of the screen, there's an off-site irrigation ditch located to what is oriented as the south side of the property and is roughly 20 feet away. So from the subdivision application that was submitted, it states that the property is not served by an existing developed irrigation system or water right. However, last week on February 10th, Development Services received public comment from a gentleman named Alfred Brule, who's the president of the Orchard Homes Irrigation Ditch Company. And he informed us that the subject property is located within the Orchard Home Irrigation District and is subject to water rights as outlined in the title report, a certain section that calls out provisions, reservations, and easements contained in deed recorded book 41 of deed records in page 514. So in cases such as this, section 30604A of the city subdivision regulations requires that potential lot buyers be notified that the lots are classified as irrigated land and may continue to be assessed for irrigation water delivery, even though the water may not be deliverable to the lots. So staff recommends 2 added conditions of approval to address this requirement. And this is reflected in memo number 1, dated February 11, 2022, that was issued and sent out and published last week. So this is an ongoing investigation, but currently this is the best approach from staff given what we know. So with all of that, for agriculture and agriculture water facilities, staff doesn't believe there will be an impact to agriculturally important soils as a result of this subdivision, and no impacts to agricultural water user or water user facilities are foreseen as a result of this subdivision if the recommended conditions of approval are imposed. So the next kind of big section of the subdivision review criteria is local services. And that has many provisions specified in that. So I'll kind of run through a few of them briefly and then dive into others more in depth. But generally speaking, the first provisions are water and sewer. And so all 19 lots will connect to city water and sewer services. The solid waste, they're going to be within the Republic services, and that will be provided to these areas. For parks and recreation, due to the proximity of Liffray Park, the Parks and Recreation Department in the city did approve a cash donation in lieu of parkland dedication. So that is the route they've gone. For impacts to schools, there will be no adverse impacts to the schools. There's documentation and emails from the superintendent of the local school districts that the added units in this area will not negatively impact these areas. So fire and law enforcement services, this will be within the city police department and fire stations. And the one requirement fire did provide or require upfront is that a fire hydrant would need to be at the south side, so the end of the hammerhead turnaround. And the last is the transportation elements, but I'm going to dive into those a little bit more next. So for the next couple of slides, there's a few things going on, but we're just going to go over different variances that are being requested for the roads and just kind of run through all of that for the transportation element. So again, just to orient, River Road is cut off for the purposes of expanding the image, but River Road is to the left and the turnaround is over here to the right. So firstly, there will be a condition. It's considered Road A right now. Condition of approval requires them to submit a street addressing and street naming plan prior to filing the final plat. So Road A is functionally classified as a low density local residential street. All 19 lots within the subdivision will have access to Road A, which connects to the River Road right away on the northern side of the subject property. So again, to the left-hand side here. So the first variance includes a couple different standards. First of which being for the low density local residential streets from table 3020 table 2A. And when that requires a minimum 45 foot wide right of way and a 33 foot wide street, including 2 foot wide travel lanes, 2 6 foot wide parking lanes and curb and gutter, plus 7 foot wide boulevards and 2 5 foot wide sidewalks. The second kind of criteria is going to be section 30203C, which states that public streets and road right-of-way must meet the standards outlined in Table 2A. And the third is Section 30204N, And that states that parking lanes is required on both sides of local residential streets and cul-de-sacs. So with that said, the applicant's requesting to vary from these regulations and is proposing instead a 29.5-foot wide right-of-way with 25.5-foot wide street widths and 1 parking lane for all of Road A. So the applicant is proposing, in addition to that, 2 20-foot wide sidewalk and utility easements alongside and adjacent to the east and west sides of Road A. And these easements will include a 7-foot wide boulevard, 5-foot wide sidewalk, and an 8-foot wide utility easement. So just as you can see here, we have obviously the 29.5-foot wide right-of-way. And then to the east and west sides, there's a 20-foot wide sidewalk and utility easement. And then included in both of those, again, here's your boulevard, we have our sidewalk, and then the utility easements. So Section 30203B of the city subdivision regulations state all streets within a subdivision must be dedicated public right-of-way, or at the city engineer's discretion, may be a private street and public access with private maintenance easements. So Road A is obviously a combination of right-of-way and easements, but these easements are designed to contribute to the functionality of the 29.5-foot wide right-of-way and the 25.5-foot wide streets, while also maintaining the allowed density for the subdivision. Staff recommends condition of approval stating the applicant shall show all dedicated public right-of-way for Road A on the face of the plot. The applicant shall show all proposed sidewalk and utility easements on the face of the plot and identify their widths and purpose. So kind of moving on, according to the City of Missoula Fire Marshal, the International Fire Code requires 20 feet of unobstructed driving surface for city fire to provide life safety and fire protection services. So parking should only be allowed on one side of the street if a variance for a narrow street section is approved. Staff is recommending a condition of approval that requires no parking signs posted along the entire eastern side of Road A to help meet this requirement. And lastly, the applicant is proposing shared driveways. As you can kind of see, I'm trying to point out there's different sections of shared driveways on this plan. And no access strips. So the blue dashed line is indicating the various sections of the no access strips, limiting to these driveway approaches, and then no others. And that's going to limit the locations of the driveways while also optimizing the opportunity for on-street parking. And so staff recommends a condition of approval requiring the applicant to show the 1-foot no access strip on the final plat. The applicant shall design and install the 30-foot wide shared driveways, and the applicant shall install no parking signs along the eastern portion of Road A. So here is kind of all the same information. It's just a cross-section view for reference later if it's helpful. We have our, again, 29.5-foot wide right-of-way. The 7-foot parking lane is shown. Here's our easements that include the landscaping and the 5-foot sidewalk. Again, just a different way to look at this. So the second variance, we focused on mainly just gearing towards the actual cul-de-sac, or in this case, hammerhead turnaround. And so section 30205A of the city subdivision regulation states that cul-de-sacs, loops, and circle streets and turnarounds are prohibited. However, section 3020B states if variances are approved for cul-de-sacs, loop, or circle streets and turnarounds, a separate set of 8 standards must be met. And so those are listed here, those separate standards. So we're saying we would recommend approval of the turnaround street and then subject to these standards. And so additional to that, the 3 red ones highlighted, 3, 5, and 6, are ones that they're also requesting to vary from. So the first one is the number 3, the 15%. And so proposed Road A represents all of 100% of the roadway miles, where it can't be no more than 15% per these standards. The property is surrounded by the existing development with no other street connections available. Development Services and Public Works and Mobility Department staff have found the property configuration and location surrounded by existing development results in no reasonable alternative to the proposed development. And the other 2 components for the minimum right-of-way radius being 50 feet and minimum pavement width radius 45 feet. It's difficult because those are largely geared towards the actual traditional cul-de-sac turnaround, where in this case, we're dealing with a hammerhead turnaround street. So the fire code has this is the snip of fire code saying that if it's going to be a hammerhead turnaround, those are the standards that it needs to meet, and this hammerhead does. So the fire was able to determine that it was still within the public health and safety, it was meeting those standards, and that was okay. So the third variance is going to be pertaining to block lengths, which is section 30302A2 in the city subdivision regulations. And essentially, it says that blocks may not exceed a maximum length of 480 feet in urban and suburban areas. So the applicant is requesting to exceed that, and they're asking to go to approximately 534 feet. The property is a narrow, elongated shape at about 162 feet wide and 638 feet long, and has one legal access from River Road. So the unique shape minimizes the road configuration options, while the proposed road configuration optimizes the residential density potential. Granting this variance to block lengths allow Road A to provide safe and accessible access to all 19 lots within the subdivision. So requiring road connections within the minimum 480-foot block length along Road A would not result in an increase of connectivity, as there are no other road connections available on the adjacent properties. The physical surroundings of the properties are consumed with a built-out residential subdivision, public park, warehouse building, and other residential areas. So as we can see again, we have the orchard homes, the built-out subdivision. There's currently an existing warehouse building all along the southern end. Here's where it connects to Lifray Park and then more existing residential. So it is the only access connection. And so our final fourth variance is to River Road. And so River Road is functionally classified as an urban collector without parking. And it has a 60-foot wide right-of-way and provides, again, the only access to this subdivision. The subdivision regulations in Table 3020 say that the minimum required right-of-way width is 80 feet, and that would include two 10-foot wide travel lanes, two 5-foot wide bike lanes with curb and gutter, and including the boulevards and sidewalks, plus a small amount for some maintenance. And so that's the first requirement. The second one is this section 30203H2, and that states that subdivisions abutting existing or proposed streets and roads must provide dedication of right-of-way to meet the requirements of Table 2A. So again, we're at a 60-foot right-of-way right now, and the requirement of an urban collector is an 80-foot right-of-way. Measured from the existing center line and extending along the entire frontage of the proposed subdivision. So for River Road along the subdivision, this would require 40 feet of right-of-way instead of the existing 30 feet. So the variance is to waive the requirement for additional right-of-way dedication. The applicant is also proposing a 10-foot wide sidewalk and utility easement along the north portion of lots 1 and 9, which in addition to River Road and the half street improvements would create sidewalk connectivity along River Road, and which would provide additional safe pedestrian access to the Skylar Court and River Road school bus stop. So highlighted kind of a little bit here, we have River Road, and here's that boulevard that they're proposing in the sidewalk with the half street improvements. And this is a cross section just showing the same thing, that we have our road, boulevard, and sidewalk. So the applicant shall pay for the cost of the half street improvements to River Road along the entire frontage of the subdivision, subject to the review and approval of the city engineer, and install those improvements or enter into an improvements agreement with financial security for future installation prior to filing the final plat. And because this subdivision is proposed to create 19 additional lots, City Public Works and Mobility Department staff indicated it would be necessary for street lighting to be installed at the intersection of Road A and River Road as part of a larger project to provide for nighttime traffic safety. City Public Works and Mobility Department staff has recommended requiring a waiver of the right to protest the creation of and participation in a street improvement district or street lighting improvement district for future lighting and other improvements along River Road, which is also a recommendation from the Development Services. So for continuing the review of transportation elements and non-motorized. So again, this is the Hammerhead turnaround and River Road is off to the left. I just blew it up so that we could see. But there is an existing 20-foot wide conditional public non-motorized access easement on the south portion of Lot 7 and Lot 14 on the Orchard Homes subdivision directly adjacent to the east of the Riverview subdivision. So over here, this is going to be to the east. And that's the existing 20-foot wide conditional access easement. And so as of this writing, no trail or sidewalk has been developed within the non-motorized access easement. Section 3022015B1 of the city subdivision regulation states subdividers must provide active transportation facilities that provide 1, continuous access to all lots within the subdivision and access to adjoining developments unless exempted by these regulations, and 2, safe routes to schools, playgrounds, bus stops, and public parks and common areas. So the applicant is proposing a 10-foot wide public non-motorized access easement along the entire southern boundary of lots 9 and 11, as seen in the red area to the right, and to provide a continued connection from the Orchard Homes subdivision to LaFrey Park. Now I'll cover just the final criteria for the subdivision, and that's on the natural environment, wildlife and wildlife habitat, and public health and safety. So as you can see here, the proposed subdivision is in an urbanized area and not close to wild lands or public lands. There's no riparian vegetation on the subject property. No adverse impacts to wildlife or the natural environment are anticipated. The Montana County Weed Management Act and the Missoula County Weed Management Plan require developers and owners to revegetate with beneficial species at the first opportunity after disturbance of soils. The applicant submitted a weed management and revegetation plan in compliance with the regulations. And so for public health and safety, this property is located outside the FEMA identified 1% annual chance flood hazard areas and floodplain, and the property does not contain areas with slopes of 25% or greater and or any other hazards. So no adverse impacts to natural environment, wildlife, and wildlife habitat, or public health and safety are foreseen as a result of this subdivision. So moving on to the staff's recommended motions. There are, again, 4 variances. And so for the first variance, staff recommends approval of the variance request to allow a 29.5-foot wide right-of-way, 25.5-foot wide street width, and 1 7-foot wide parking lane, and 2 20-foot wide easements containing 7-foot wide boulevard and 5-foot wide sidewalks, and the 8-foot wide utility easement. For variance number 2, staff recommends approval of the variance request to allow for turnaround streets, Road A, further approving the variance from specific turnaround design standards, including the requirements that turnarounds may not represent more than 15% of the total roadway miles in a subdivision. The right-of-way radius must be a minimum of 50 feet, and the pavement width must be a minimum of 45 feet. And the third variance, staff recommends approval of the variance request to allow a block length of roughly 534 feet. For variance number 4, staff recommends approval of the variance request to allow the existing River Road 60-foot wide right-of-way and proposed improvements. For the subdivision motion, there was, with the irrigation ditch, note that came about from the president of the Orchard Homes Company. There was an amendment, again, that was sent out, noted as memo number 1 on February 11th. So there was a change or a recommended amendment to the motion, and that is the approval of the Riverview subdivision preliminary plat application, subject to the recommended conditions of approval based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report as amended in memo number 1, dated February 11, 2022. And lastly, for the rezoning motion, staff recommends the approval of the adoption of the ordinance to rezone the subject property located at 1923 River Road from RT10 to RT 5.4, based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report. So just kind of to note, update. I know there's a lot of public listening in on this as well. Last night, the item did go to City Council and was supposed to be on the first reading of the ordinance, and there was an issue with that. So we did have to change. Obviously, we're here tonight for planning board, but we had to change the City Council schedule. So I just wanted to post this as well for everyone. We'll be sending out new notification letters, a new legal ad. We'll be reposting the site, kind of covering all our bases there, but I wanted to let everyone know here. So the changes are that on February 28th will be the first reading of the ordinance and the referral to LUP. So that's just a non-real action item, but that's where council will refer the item. And then on March 2nd will be the Land Use and Planning Committee hearing for info only. We've always had a kind of placeholder on March 9th for a second LUP on a tentative as needed basis if more public comment was needed, or we'll address it at that time. And then lastly, the important one is that the public hearing and final consideration were merged to the same day and will take place on March 14th. And lastly, I just have a couple of the last slides that include all the conditions of approval, mainly for reference. I don't want to, or I don't think you want me to run through them all. So I just have them there if needed, but that concludes the presentation.
Outstanding. Well done. Thank you, Alex. And so now if there is, I'm sorry, but I didn't get names for who might be attending for the IMEG or IMEG group. So if there are any representatives with IMEG here tonight that would like to make a presentation or just have something to say, now is the time for that, and please do so.
Thanks, Sean. My name is Joe Dennert. I'm with IMEG. Can everyone hear me? Great. I believe I'm also joined with by Danny Oberweiser and Paul Forsting, also from IMEG. I do have a quick presentation. Let's see if I can figure this out here. Can you all see that screen there, the presentation?
Yes, I can see that now there, Joe.
Full screen. All right, sounds good. Well, Alex, thank you so much for the thorough presentation. Made my job very easy as far as going over everything and making sure everyone's informed and on the same page. Thank you for that. Also, obviously, members of the planning board, thank you all so much for being here tonight. And then any members of the public that have come out to voice your opinions regarding the proposed subdivision. I appreciate that as well. Alex did cover a lot in her presentation, so I'll try to skip over anything for time's sake that might be redundant. All right, looks like it's changing on my screen. Hopefully it is on y'all's as well. I just wanted to start by giving a brief overview of the process that kind of brought us here today. We had the pre-application meeting back in March, and particularly I want to thank any members of the public that are here right now, or maybe they couldn't attend, but to everyone who came out for the neighborhood meeting. That was a really good meeting. It had a good turnout. And everyone who was there offered some really valuable feedback that helped shape the design that we actually ended up putting forth. So thanks again to any members of the public that attended that meeting, any neighbors or residents in the area. Following that meeting, we moved through all the necessary submittals and reviews to make it to governing body by the end of last year. Obviously, planning board meeting tonight. And Alex, thanks again for being pretty quick and on it for rescheduling that city council hearing after the consent agenda issue on Monday. Thanks again. Before we dive into the existing conditions and really cover anything else, I just want to reiterate that the proposed rezone aligns with the growth policy recommendation for the land use designation of residential medium density from 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre. That's an important point. And that the subdivision aligns with the overall character present in the area. I believe you can see it if I go back 2 slides. Here, there are multiple subdivisions that do utilize this cul-de-sac or turnaround design. And Alex, thanks for stating the housing policy from the growth policy, linking the housing affordability to the ability to achieve more compact development, which is one of the driving factors for the developer in this project. We believe the property's location within the city makes it ideal for infill development, which is a step towards accomplishing the city's housing policy goals, while also adhering to the growth policy land use designation and fitting in well with the overall neighborhood character. The proposed subdivision will be served by city water and sewer, and it will provide pedestrian access to Lefray Park to the west while still complying with the required zoning setbacks and providing necessary utility and public access easements. One thing that's interesting here, and I'm sure it'll be talked about tonight, but that subdivision directly to the east, it was referenced in Alex's presentation, the Carter's Orchard Homes. One of the things that was brought up in the neighborhood meeting, they were curious about basically the backyards that are proposed for this development. And you can see here that the lack of setbacks for this Carter's Orchard Homes was under a plan unit development that happened in the past. But as you can see, the proposed lots here, we do have the required 20-foot setback and we'll have those backyards for the proposed development. Yeah, Alex, I can't thank you enough. You made this really easy. You covered those variances perfectly in depth. Instead of re-reviewing kind of all the details that go along with those, I do want to make it clear that the proposed road design actually came to fruition after collaborating with the developer on what was economically feasible, and then working with the city to make sure that the road we were presenting would be, provide safe and adequate access for the public, and also help realize that intent of the growth policy for the area. And even with the proposed variances with this project, the proposed road still provides 16 on-street parking spaces, as well as 2-car garages and that 30-foot shared driveway for each home. Lastly, I just want to draw attention to 2 of the really cool infrastructure improvements that are being proposed for the subdivision. Obviously, the River Road improvements, this is another thing that came up in the neighborhood meeting regarding, not having sidewalks along the road and boulevard curb gutter. So we are proposing those River Road improvements along the northern front with sidewalk, boulevard, curb, and gutter. And then also the Lefray Park connection. For non-motorized travel, that'll be huge, not only for residents in the proposed subdivision, but also I think there's that pedestrian footbridge that actually crosses from Lefray over into North Johnson, or that Idaho Street connection. And so this will actually be pretty cool, that people will be able to use the sidewalk to access that from a different direction. So I just wanted to draw attention to those before wrapping things up here. In closing, obviously, Alex, thank you so much for all your work reviewing and re-reviewing the proposal and for the recommendations for approval for variances, rezone, and the subdivision. Also, again, I want to thank the planning board for being here tonight and listening to our presentations, and obviously all the members of the public. I know that between Alex's presentation and my own, we just covered a lot of information, but I believe it's worth mentioning the key takeaway from my perspective. And it's really that the proposed subdivision aligns with the city's housing goals and the growth policy while still being economically feasible for the developer. Without the proposed rezone to allow for the higher density development and the proposed variances to accommodate the slightly narrower road, the project would really either become unaffordable for future residents or undesirable to developers due to the reduced density. So with that, Paul Forsting, Danny Oberweiser, and myself are all available for questions as people may have them. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Does anybody on the planning board need any clarification of anything before we move into the public hearing section? Just not any broad discussion, but just clarifying questions on any of the points. There's a lot here tonight and several variances. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. So we're going to open up the public hearing portion of the meeting tonight. This is the time for folks out in the community to go ahead and raise your hand. I'll create a stack and we will try and give you time. Typically it's 3 minutes per person. And depending on how long our list is, will depend on how strict I am about that 3 minutes. So we'll go ahead and open up the public hearing portion here. And I have, I didn't see who went up first, but right now I have either Dan B or I'm not sure, and then Shirley Kinsey, and then Carrie will be third. So those are the first three folks I have on the stack here. And
Okay, hello?
yes, I can hear you. You're identified as Dan B. If you could give your name and where you're at in Missoula, or where, and then your comment, please.
Yeah, my name is actually, wait a minute, we've got a major echo here. I gotta move.
Never mind. I'll take a real quick second to remind everybody to go ahead and, if you're watching on one device and trying to talk on another, go ahead and turn off the device that you're watching on or viewing the public hearing on, so you don't get that echo. Go ahead,
Okay.
please.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm actually the HOA president for the Carter, I'm sorry, my name is Joe Beck. I live at 605 Carter Court. We have a homeowners association on Carter Court, and we have 13 houses on our block. And I guess I want to ask, first off, I wrote a letter to the committee that was submitted on the website. I'm just curious how many of the board members have, or your members have seen that.
I'm seeing nods of approval from most, I think everybody. It looks like everybody read that.
Okay. One of the things I want to reiterate in that letter, and I want to let everyone know that we have 13 houses, all 13 houses in the subdivision are against this rezoning. We understand, like I said, that development is necessary in Missoula, but bad development isn't necessary. And right now we have, with our covenants, is we can't park on our street because especially in the winter, you get people removing snow. Pretty soon you've got one lane down the street. If you are allowing parking on the street, but only on one side, and you've got 16 slots available, if you have people that have 3 cars, anytime you're buying something, oftentimes you're going to have at least 2 cars, 3 cars. That's going to be overflow parking that there'll be no room for, or people will park illegally. One of my biggest concerns also is that the infrastructure for River Road is so horrendous. And I mentioned that in my letter, and I really want to reiterate again how poor it is. And I think actually it's almost unfair that you vote before you really come out and look at that, because it is so narrow and so dangerous. Like I said, when my grandkids come over, we have to get in the car to walk a block, or to drive a block to get to LaFrey Park, because you are right on the road. And that is not just from, you're putting your life at hands just getting on River Road, either on a bike or walking. If you want to walk to the bus stop, it's the same thing. Like I said, I'm a hiker, I'm a walker. I like to walk around Missoula. That's one of the reasons why I love living here. And it is dangerous. And until we addressed a lot of this infrastructure problem in this neighborhood that I feel has been sorely ignored, I don't even know the word to say. I know that it's hard to get in the queue, and I know that this is somewhere on the back burner, but to shove 19 houses in an area that is zoned, I want to pay attention to this too. It is zoned for 10. I don't know why we have to keep granting variances for homes that destroy other neighborhoods. We are not caring. We understand the development need, but why will you ruin? We will have overflow parking on our street. I have no doubt. We have a trailer park across the way. Those people park on our street. just a mess. And when you start throwing in motorcycles, campers, trailers, like everybody accumulates when they own a home, it's going to be a zoo. And I have to really point out something else that is really this winter when they have snow.
You're over your time. If you could wrap it up, please.
Okay. Well, when you have snow and you've got parking on one side, good luck trying to get a vehicle for emergency down that street, because it'll be impossible. And I just want to point that out. Anyway, 13 homeowners on this street. We're all, we understand development. We're not against it. We understand it has to happen. But this is just an affront to us. And we were just really stunned to see this. And I'm sure my other neighbors will speak up, but I really do. I do appreciate reading my letter, and that actually says what I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. So next I have Shirley Kinsey, and I'd just like to remind everybody that you have 3 minutes, and I will, as politely as I can, let you know when that time comes about. And so Shirley, if I've got the wrong name or something along those lines, just let me know that at the beginning, and I'll mark that. So Shirley, if you could unmute yourself and go ahead and make your comment.
Thank you. Shirley Kinsey, I live at 1927 River Road. And I'd like to just start by saying I'm not anti-development. And I honestly hate not agreeing with staff. But in this case, I really do disagree with staff and their approval. I support development standards. I believe in standards. They're very important in creating a stable urban environment. I believe also what Joe was saying about the characteristic of the Orchard Home and neighborhood, and by rezoning this R10 to R5.4, that is not in that area characteristic at all. The road, that lot is so narrow that they need 4 variances to put in these houses. That means that it's not adequate lot size, in my opinion. I agree with Joe about the River Road. River Road is dangerous. You have to walk down the street in order to get anywhere on River Road. There's a few spots that have sidewalks, but if you're walking to the transits to hop on the bus, you're walking in the street. I kind of take exception to the number of times the developer that said in their application that this property was surrounded by rental properties, an existing subdivision, and parkland. It's not. Most of the people surrounding this are homeowners, and we've been here for a long time. Also, through the variance application, the developer states that in like 3 different places that that the variances and rezoning is not injurious to other persons or properties. And I adamantly disagree with that as well, because it'll decimate my property. The front window of our bay will be viewing 3 backyards. When I bought my house, I knew that that lot was going to be developed, but at an R10, I had no clue that it would be developed into a 19 lot dwelling units. I'm sorry, I'm angry. I'd like the planning board to consider keeping the R10 zoning. And in closing, I just feel like it'd be poor planning to allow the developer to build that many units on this narrow lot. There's standards for a reason. And if you keep providing variance all over the place, why even have standards? You know, over the past 16 years, I've poured my heart and soul into my property. And I implore the planning board to not approve this rezoning. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Shirley. Definitely appreciate you taking the time to sit through with us and make your comments. Okay, so the next person I have on my list here is Carrie. And Carrie, I'll just remind you again, you're going to have 3 minutes, and I will do my best to be polite about interrupting you. So go ahead and say your piece.
Thank you. My two previous neighbors have done a beautiful job of laying out some of the most prominent concerns that we have. I want to just hit a couple more ideas along their thought of utilizing River Road in this manner. The developers want to convince us that this would be efficient and effective travel opportunities. And I think that we need to take into consideration that River Road is not your typical quiet neighborhood road. It's a busy connector between Reserve and Russell. In addition, there's a gravel facility on this road, which it pumps trucks and all kinds of vehicles coming back and forth. Since this is a connector, the drivers tend to not be very observant about speed limits or observant the fact that there's a park on this road and they need to slow down and be careful. So we have a built-in factor for a disaster waiting to happen, and the fact that we have no curbs and gutters on this is huge. You're in the winter, the snow is plowed into the right-of-way or the easement, and you are in the street on icy, slushy streets trying to get to the bus or to the park. I also noticed in the way I understand this plot that they are not developing a sidewalk between the end of their subdivision and the Skyla bus drop. So those kiddos are going to have to travel half a block without a sidewalk, which means they're in the road in the winter time. There's no getting around, or in the spring when it's rainy, it's just a bog, it's muddy in there. So unless that's addressed, I think you have a huge potential for tragedy to happen in there. I also want to point out that the 152 additional trips that they project for this area would greatly impact the travel on Curtis Street. And Curtis is narrow. It has not been developed as far as sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. And it is so full of potholes. I urge you, if you haven't been down Curtis or River Road, take that trip and see what it is like. That is just impassable. Adding 152 more vehicles daily to that is just ridiculous. And the final factor is the egress off of River Road onto Reserve if they're trying to get out of this area. It's almost impossible to get on Reserve during rush hour turning right. You just have to count on the courtesy of a driver oncoming to slow down and let you in. And turning left is totally impossible. So that's, again, adding 150 more trips a day out of a 19 unit subdivision is just unconscionable. I think that we certainly want to see development, but I question the affordability. These are going to be $400,000 to $500,000 homes. That is not addressing the affordability issue in Missoula. It is addressing the greed of the developers. We certainly in this subdivision are not opposed to a nice little neighborhood development with 10, 11 houses, and would be happy to welcome those people as neighbors. We just do not want to see these conditions of danger and overcrowding. For the sake of
You're at
greed.
3 minutes there.
All righty, thank you so much. I appreciate your consideration of this, and I hope you do drive the neighborhood and check out what we're facing. Thank you.
Excuse me, Carrie, could I get your last name for the record, please?
Yes, Shelton, Shelton.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Carrie, for taking the time to make a comment. Okay, so I have on my stack here, I have a Russell Mellon, and then a Nancy Lowe, and then a Katie Fizzle. I hope that's correct. And so we're going to go to Russell Mellon next. And just as a reminder, you have 3 minutes to make your comment. And go ahead and unmute yourself there, Russell, and state your full name and correct me if I've got something wrong. Oh, wait a minute. Russell just disappeared from my attendees list. Oh, no, there. Right. I got you now again, Russell, but you're muted. Go ahead. There you go.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Russell Mellon, and myself and my wife, Kathy, live at 609 Carter Court. And our backyard is directly behind the proposed subdivision. We would like to propose, we like the proposed subdivision to be continued to be zoned as an R10 rather than an R5.4. We are concerned about too many townhouses on 2.38 acres, adequate parking for residents, increased traffic in area, and according to the proposed plans, making a T-shaped instead of a cul-de-sac at the end of the property. We appreciate you reviewing our suggestions. I do agree with everybody that has spoken so far. And I would like to see that you do not vote on this until you come out and you look at our subdivision on Carter Court. Also, there's a subdivision over on Skylar Court. And if you'll sit at the end of those subdivisions and look down those subdivisions, you will not see no cars parked on the road. Their cars are all parked in the driveways. Our landscaping is just impeccable. You're able to walk up and down those subdivisions without a problem. I appreciate you listening to us. And I just don't want to see a subdivision like what happened up on Wyoming Street, made such a mess up on Wyoming Street where you can't even get 2 cars down the road. Thank you for listening to me.
Great. Thank you, Russell. Appreciate you taking the time. I also want to just take a real quick second to remind folks that when they are done with their comments, if you stay on the line to mute the device that you're talking into. I see some folks that are still, their mic is still open and we may hear your background noise. So next I have Nancy Lowe. And Nancy, if you could unmute yourself and go ahead and make your comment and give us your full name. And please try and keep in mind you have about 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. I also live on Carter Court at 619. And I agree with what everyone has said so far, so I'm not gonna keep repeating that same thing. But I want to point out a couple things that I think is really important in that we are a 55 and older community. We were probably the first one in Missoula. And Mark Earls built this, and it's a model that Missoula should emulate on any subdivision that they ever approve. If you approve this housing unit that's proposed as such, I'm going to have a 2-story house 20 feet from my end of my yard, which is small anyway, which is going to completely block my light, my air, and I will have 0 view. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Like my sweet little neighbor is 92 years old, and she's worried she's going to have to sell her house if this housing development goes through. And I'm with the other people. I understand the need for some good housing in Missoula, but cramming 19 houses in this 2-acre lot is what I call greed. I have no other way to put it. I'm also going to make one other comment that I think may be a little controversial. I have noticed that these infills are pretty much only put in a couple parts of town. They aren't put in the Rattlesnake, and they are not put in Grant Creek where rich people live. I would please keep that in mind, that they're put on the north side in our Orchard Homes area. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Nancy. We appreciate your comments.
Okay, thank you.
And then also just remember to mute yourself when you get off. So next on my list here, I have Katie Fizzle, and then I have some phone numbers that are coming up. So I only show part of your phone number. So after Kate, I'm sorry, I said Katie. After Kate Fizzle is a 406, and last three digits are 184. And then following that is 406, last three digits 254. So those are the next three people I have on my stack here. So Kate Fizzle, go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your thoughts.
Okay,
Kate,
there we go. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. I'm.
Can you give us your name, sir?
I am Richard Fizzell,
Fizzell.
631 Carter Court. I live here with my wife, Kate, hence the first name distinction. I think we were going to echo what all the residents have said so far. We agree that the crowding factor is such that it's making life more difficult around here with the lack of sidewalks on a good portion of River Road, which will only be exacerbated by this development, and the turnaround for equipment. We have our doubts that that hammerhead is sufficient for a good size fire rig, and also would not have much storage space, if you want to call it that, for snow storage that has been removed from the main drag. We agree that development is necessary, and we're in favor of wise development, but 11 houses are a lot better than 19 townhouses. The overflow parking, which we find ourselves to be from time to time through no issue of our own, just people say, well, we can't park on River Road, that's already crowded, and the parking there is in the area where there will be the new approach road, and so there'll be no parking there, and so that will increase the unwanted parking on our road here in Carter Court. So basically, we're against trying to squeeze too many people into too little space, which is dramatically can dramatically affect the quality of life. And lastly, the variance process. We're not saying that nothing was done. It's just that we see that the recommendation is that this variance be granted, that variance be granted, and so on. But I think maybe taking a little breather and going through the actual data for why, or projections at least, why a variance ought to be granted. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Just to say that we're pretty unanimous on this, the folks here in Carter Court.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Richard, and I apologize for messing up your last name there.
Okay.
We've had worse.
So have I. Okay, so So the next couple of people on my stack here, I don't have names for, I just have your phone number. So I want, just gonna take a reminder here that everybody gets 3 minutes, and I'll do my best to interrupt you politely. And so the next person to speak is phone number 406, and the last 3 digits are 184. So if you could unmute yourself and then give us your full name at the very least, and your address if you like, but for the record, we need your full name.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me? My name is Jana Monser, M-O-N-S-E-R. I live at 606 Carter Court, and I am just beyond kind of disgusted about the variance that's up for vote on the housing units that are going to be next door. I'm with Russell and Kate going, well, why would you want to grant this variance in the for so many houses in such small space, with River Road already congested and in very poor condition. And I think it's just an accident waiting to happen. And I too support new construction, and I think Missoula will be glad to have this new construction, but 10 units versus 19 units, the 10 obviously is more agreeable, and it seems more along the line of the Garden City, Missoula. We're becoming something else, and this is part of why we're becoming something that we don't even recognize. And so I would just appreciate you listening to all of us, and I hope that you're able to come out and look the situation over before making a vote. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Janice. Definitely appreciate you taking the time to be here. And it looks like the other phone number that I had on here has dropped off. So that brings us to Matthew Bell is the next person I have on the stack. And then after Matthew Bell, I have I believe it's Sam Pollock. So we're going to go to Matthew Bell next, and go ahead and unmute yourself, Matthew, and speak your piece.
All right. Well, hello, this is Matthew Bell. I'd like to offer a bit of a different perspective just for everyone here. I'm not a member or a resident of anywhere nearby the development. I'm a renter here in Missoula. And I think it's pretty clear that Missoula needs a lot more houses. I know a lot of people that I've talked to, longtime residents of Missoula, people who grew up here, they're thinking that they can't buy a house here. It's impossible. They have to move to, like, I know people were, my friends were going to go St. Paul or other places, and that's just not how you grow a city. I think we need a lot more residential houses. There's some pretty clear problems identified by the other people who've talked, specifically the idea that you can't go to the bus stop for kids without a full sidewalk. I think sidewalks are incredibly important. And if they're going to be building 19 dwelling units, you got to make a sidewalk to go to wherever the kids are going to get picked up. And River Road is also pretty terrible in terms of sidewalks. And I'd hope that that's in the planning council's knowledge. But I think that especially the 5.4 development, that's how you solve the crisis that we have in here in Missoula. That's all.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate you taking the time to be here this evening. So next on my stack is Sam Pollock. And go ahead and unmute yourself, and a little reminder that you've got 3 minutes, and please state your full name for the record.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Sue Polich and I live at 612 Carter Court with my husband, Jim. I would just like to say that I'd just like to confirm that I agree with all the concerns and facts presented by my neighbors through correspondence and during this meeting. But I would also just like to say infrastructure is a huge problem here. If we had a beautiful river road that was completely sidewalked and curbed, it probably would be a different situation and maybe a widening of the road. But the area in this that we're talking about tonight, where to the north of this project is a trailer court, the cars are parked right next to the road. So this area, and when you're coming toward my area on Carter Court from the west, heading east on River Road to Carter Court, it is so tight in that area that I always slow down to like at least 10 miles an hour because I'm just waiting for something to happen in that area. And this area happens to be where this project is going to get built, not with 10 houses, but 19 or 18. And it just doesn't make sense. I know this property could sell. I don't believe the story that it wouldn't be valuable enough for them to do this or someone else to do this. If you just built some decent homes on there and sold them for $450,000 or whatever, people will buy them. If it's in a nice area, I mean, if the project is developed correctly. This, I just don't believe is going to look attractive. It's going to be crammed with cars, just like Wyoming Street and so many other areas that have crammed in housing. So infrastructure would help for sure on River Road. The whole road needs to be done and Curtis needs to be done. It's just a nightmare. I can't walk anywhere on River Road and feel safe. So I would just like for you all to come and look at this because it's a mess and really think about whether we really need to jam in that many in this specific area. Maybe somewhere else, if it was down the road where it was more open. This is just a crazy little area that we're in right here. And it's just compact and not good for this type of building project where we're gonna, put in 18 or 19 homes. It just does not make sense. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sue. Again, appreciate you taking the time to be here. I don't have anybody else currently new in my attendees box here, so we're just going to take a minute to allow anybody else to attend before we close out the public hearing portion of this. So just stand by, folks, and we'll just make sure we're not missing anybody with our public hearing.
Can we ask IMEG a question? This is Evelyn Fizell.
I guess I'll grant that if you can keep it short.
Well, it's short. Again, we're on Carter Court. We're on the west side.
Yes.
Where our backyards will be here. Everyone on this side of the court did get a letter about this meeting. The ones on the other side of Carter Court did not get a meeting. And I measured from my back fence, from our back fence to their front porch, and it was 120 feet. So I'm curious why they did not get a letter about this meeting.
Okay, so I think what I'll do, Kate.
For the city, I don't know who did this.
Yes. So what I think I'll do is when we get to the board members portion of the meeting, I will write that question down and make sure that it gets addressed.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. So in that time there, I haven't seen any new members of the community join in. So I will begin to wrap this up. And what I would like to just say to end things here is any members of the public and community, this is just your first stage of the process, or like, technically it should be second stage, but one got put off. So stick with it. Public involvement is extremely important. I know that planning board members listen intently to community members, as well do city council members. So don't give up, no matter what happens tonight, and stick with your agenda, whatever that may be. So not seeing anybody new coming into the conversation, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing portion of the agenda, or of this part of the agenda, and bring this over to the planning board. One second, I'm writing that question down. Okay, I did not see hands go up there, so I'm gonna start with Rick, and then it'll be Shane. So go ahead, Rick.
Thank you, Sean. Rick Hall. Is this where we could ask a question of the developer or the engineers?
Yeah, this is the time for the planning board to ask any questions that you may have, and we can discuss as we like.
Okay. I have a few of them. I'll get them. They kind of concern the same thing. The 15-foot wide shared driveway, how many vehicles will that accommodate? I heard that all of the units have 2-car garages, and that's per each side was my question. And I also wanted to know if they ever considered, like the development behind it, having a 0 setback and have additional room on the roadway, since the development behind it seems to have no setback and no backyards, which would allow a greater roadway and more parking on both sides of the street. I believe you took 20 on both sides. So those are my questions.
All right, thank you, Rick. Staff, that seems like pretty good. Or Alex, do you want to try to address that?
Yes, I can address a portion of it, and then I'm sure Joe can chime in. But in regards to the development, specifically, Joe mentioned the 2 off-street parking for the garages. So at time of building permit, they will need to meet Title 20 parking requirements. So that will be minimum 2 per dwelling unit. So that will be per lot. So one house, 2 off-street parking spaces. So for all 19 lots. And to my knowledge, though, there was no conversation or recommendation or proposal from IMEG to do a different rear setback. What the right-of-way did, and then by doing the easements instead of the full right-of-way, that allowed for, because there is a 20-foot front yard setback. So that's from the parcel line, though. And so doing the easements in lieu of having those, the sidewalk and the boulevard be included in the right-of-way gave them a little bit more flexibility in that front yard setback, because they were going to comply with the rear 20-foot setback.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Shane, that brings you up. And just as a reminder to new planning board members, when you're done, go ahead and lower your hand, please.
Rick, did your questions all get addressed regarding the shared driveways and then the also garages?
Yeah, I mean, I think it did. There are garages, but also a parking area in the driveway. That was sort of what I was getting at.
Yeah, yep, that's exactly right. 2-car garages and then also 2 parking spaces with the 30-foot shared driveway for each resident.
Great, thanks, Joe. I'll try and make sure you get a chance to comment next time. Okay, Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, I think my question, or I think my first question is for Alex. Would you mind walking us through the difference between the RM10 or RT10 and RT 5.4? Are there, I guess what I'm getting at, obviously like the parcel size is different. Are there differences in allowable height and or differences in setbacks or anything like that?
Thank you. There aren't many differences at all. Actually, the RT10 allows for more allowed permittable building types, only one, but it's a small difference. And the setbacks are going to be the same in either scenario. It's 20-foot front and rear. It's a 7.5-foot side setback or 1/3 the building height. So typically if the building exceeds about 22 feet, it will be a little bit of bigger setback depending on that specific height. And the height is the same requirement as well. It's either, depending on the roof pitch, 30 or 35 feet in either zoning district. So that main difference is just going to be the density.
So if it were to remain the RT10, the 20-foot setback, which I'm hearing is a concern, building within 20 feet of the property line, is that wouldn't change with this zoning change at all?
Correct. Yep, it's there for either zoning district.
Great. I'll just leave it there for now. Come back.
Okay, looks like that's good on that end. Dory, you're up next.
Okay, thanks. Hi, I want to first thank all of the folks in the community who've just come forward to ask questions and express their points of view. I also want to thank Alex and Joe. I know that these proposals take a ton of work and there's a lot of detail involved, so I appreciate all the work that's gone into this too. So I have a few things. One, I guess I want to say that, based on everything I've seen and read and looked at, certainly this is a good place for a subdivision. I don't really have, much sort of disagreement with that. I think that given what's going on surrounding lots and our growth policy and the current zoning in that area, it makes sense. I do tend to feel like, based on my own read of all this, that we're trying to squeeze an awful lot on a small piece of property. And as a result, we're having to make a number of other adjustments to make that work. And I guess, I do feel like, for those of us who have the privilege of owning and investing in and developing property, we really do need to think more about the greater impact of our work, in addition to making a profit. And I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive, but I think it requires a way of thinking that's perhaps different than what we've been accustomed to. And so sort of in that vein, I have a few questions and want to put a few thoughts out there. I've heard a lot about how this is consistent with our growth policy, but I've read the growth policy cover to cover. And I also know that there is sort of a theme of sustainability in our growth policy, which really speaks to affordability and, green design and climate preparedness and resiliency, and overall livability and quality of life. And I guess I'm interested, I have a few questions around sort of sustainability. One would be affordability. I'm interested in asking about thoughts that have gone into this project regarding affordability. My understanding is these units are going to be sold at market value, so they're not really attainable units, which is sort of one of our greatest challenges here in Missoula. I also am curious, I am aware that IMEG is a large national company with offices in 60 different places in the US and 2 overseas. And I also know that, as a company, IMEG really prides itself on sustainability. And so I'd like to know what discussions have taken place, if any, regarding thoughts about the actual construction of these units. And, will there be accommodations for any future energy efficiency, recycled goods, again, sort of climate mitigation and resiliency, and that might be landscaping. It also might be in the structure itself. And then the last thing sort of in line with that is, there is two buildings on this property that'll be deconstructed. And I know they're historic, mostly just from the standpoint that they've been there longer than 50 years. But I wonder if also deconstruction has been considered, which would sort of be more in line with the zero waste goals of Missoula. So those are a few, and I know that's a lot, but those are just the things that are sort of been on my mind in my review. I'll stop there. Thanks. And maybe Joe could respond to some of that. That would be great.
Sure, Sean, do I just have full reign to respond in this case, or?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, once again, my name is Joe Dennert, and I work at IMEG. Dory, thank you so much for your comments. We might have to tag team this. I might pass it off to Paul or Danny, who are also with me on this call, but I'll respond to what I can. So first and foremost, you started out talking about really the, affordability focus and the growth policy and how that fits in to the Missoula narrative, how that fits into really infill development period in the city. And there is the reality that affordability is a buzzword. You can throw it around, but when you start saying affordable homes in the Rattlesnake, affordable homes in downtown, let's be realistic. Those aren't the affordable areas to build. We're not talking about affordability on riverfront. We're talking about affordability in bedroom communities. That's just the fact. However, from a development standpoint, and we talked about this with the developer that we're representing, the even idea of affordability becomes so unreachable whenever you start reducing the allowed density, that to put 5 homes on here or 10 homes on here would just make those homes so much more unreachable, so much more outside of the market rate for homes that are in existence in the city now. And, for the RT10 versus RT 5.4, like Alex said, the setbacks are they're identical. So for houses on either side of this subdivision road, there would still have to be these concessions, these variances that we would have to go through to fit the 20-foot rear and the 20-foot front setback. It would just reduce the total number of homes, the density that's allowed. And from the developer standpoint, for them to make money, if they can get 19 homes and charge market rate, putting in 8 homes or 9 homes, they would need to charge double that to make sure that they're the project's profitable for them. So I hope that, kind of gets at some of the affordability. It's a difficult problem to talk about when we're talking about infill development in the city because of the value of market rate homes now. As far as sustainability, Paul, do you have anything you can chime in? For construction standards?
Paul Forsting. I'm Joe's coworker. I'm a planner at IMEG. There hasn't been any specific discussions on sustainability design efforts with the buildings. Quite frankly, we haven't talked much about the buildings with these subdivisions. We talk about the infrastructure, but from an infrastructure standpoint, we do see some elements of sustainability. We're connecting to the city's water and sewer systems. That's an alternative to that would be having your own septic system, your own well, which we still see in this neighborhood, although they're not permissible anymore. But the houses are going to go somewhere, and the infill concept is that we'd rather have them go here than out in a field that would require its own septic system, its own well, less environmental provisions there. We also have some sustainability elements with location here. We're close to public transit. It's convenient for folks to hop on their bike and make it to downtown or jump on the Milwaukee Trail. And so although we probably didn't touch on all the sustainability items that you mentioned there, Dory, I think the client is doing all he can to incorporate those items. Not to mention, you mentioned taking down the building and reuse. I think they're more than welcome to concepts and ideas, and they'll reuse whatever they can from that building. I don't know exactly what that means or how much could be salvaged in a deconstruction of a house like that. I just don't know, but I know they're open to that, and I think they'll reuse as much as they possibly can.
Thank you.
Does any other planning board members? Oh, I see some hands going up now. Okay. So I think I had Ellie, then Toon, and then Micah. So Ellie, go ahead with any questions you might have for staff or IMEG.
My question is mostly about some of the infrastructure pieces. I know that the city is working on putting in sidewalks for some of these neighborhoods that are in need of those. Alex, do you have any sense of if River Road is slated for some of those sidewalk developments and improvements?
River Road has been identified in the transportation long range plan to be updated at some point. The specifics of kind of timing is, I think, within 6 to 10 years or so. And then the actual details of how that's going to be laid out, I am unfamiliar with.
Okay. And I guess that's it for now. I'm going to wait and hear what other questions folks have. Thank you.
And just to make a quick clarification for planning board members, I kind of messed up, and this is our time to ask questions of staff and IMEG. When we get a motion on the table, then we can begin to hash out our thoughts and feelings and where we stand on this issue. So just to clarify that for some of the newer members and even for myself, I kind of misstated that earlier on. So Toon, I have you up next.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I also want to echo Dory's comments from the staff and IMEG. I think this is a very thorough presentation. I think a lot of information. To that end, though, I want to build a little bit on what Shane was asking around the zoning. One of the concerns that came out in the public comments was about building height, and so I was curious if the current zoning has any opportunities to ensure that these are single, or there's this height restriction at all. It sounds like RT10 still would allow for townhomes, so even the existing code, they could have built up higher, if you will. And so I don't know if there was any opportunity to put in some kind of a variant, not a variance, but some kind of clause there. And then also maybe from IMEG to get some, again, this is not an obligation certainly, but it sounds like the plan is to stay relatively low or single floor, right, on the housing?
I can touch on your first question. So RT10 or RT 5.4, it'll be based on the roof pitch, but if it's a 8 and 12 roof pitch or less, then the allowed height is 30 feet. And if it's 8 and 12 or greater, the allowed height is 35 feet. So there's a little bit of a depending factor there, but in either zoning district, whether it gets rezoned or not, that's the allowable height without needing any kind of variance from zoning. That's just, today they could do 30 or 35 feet depending on the roof pitch.
Right. So I just wanted to clarify again, there's just because it's called townhome doesn't really mean anything. It's just like it could have been up to 30, 35 feet regardless.
Correct. Yeah, it's just an emphasis on the zoning district specifically. Other residential districts we have emphasize multi-dwelling. This one emphasizes 2-unit townhouses, but detached houses are also allowed uses in this area.
Thank you.
And regarding the 2-story or 1-story, thank you for your question. Once again, this is Joe Dennert with IMEG. We don't know that at this current moment. Obviously the developer is subject to the zoning code for heights. We do have setbacks which provide for the adequate space for light if folks, if the developer does choose to do those 2 stories. But right now it's still in the works from the developer standpoint.
Thank you, Joe. And so up next I have Micah, but Micah, I see Dave DeGrand-Prix has his hand up with staff. And I'm going to let him interject here real quick. Go ahead, Dave.
All right, thank you, Sean. Hi, I'm Dave DeGrand-Prix, community planner with CPDI, assisting Alex on this project. I just wanted to quickly address Ellie's question on River Road improvements. So River Road has been identified through the MPO, so Metropolitan Planning Organization's Long Range Transportation Plan. as being a street that is proposed for and planned for complete street improvements. And so what that means is sidewalks, boulevards, traffic calming, things like that. So significant upgrades from Russell to Reserve. It's, as Alex described, it's a project that the city is working on funding for. We don't have a specific date when those improvements will be made, but but between the next 6 to 15 years, something like that. So it's definitely scheduled for upgrade. And then in terms of the developer's obligation in this case, so the way that the city handles situations like this, when a development like this comes in, the developer is required to improve the street frontage. So install or pay for the installation, which is most likely the case here, of boulevard, sidewalk, curb, and then half street paving. So basically street improvements that would meet complete street standards along the street frontage. Again, so in this case, it's unlikely the developer would actually make those improvements, but the developer would be responsible for the costs of those improvements along the street frontage here. So although we can't, it would be silly for the developer to make those improvements just on this stretch of roadway while the rest of River Road is not improved. So the city would do it all as one project, but the developer would be responsible essentially for a proportional share of costs, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you, Dave. I think that helped clarify some things for some of us. Definitely, it often feels like we're putting the cart before the horse as far as some infrastructure goes, but funding, of course, is always the main piece of that puzzle. So I have Micah up next for questions and then Ellie again. Go ahead, Micah.
Great, thanks, Sean. And thanks, Dave. That was really helpful to get more context because I had a lot of questions around the timeline for any infrastructure developments. I just have kind of a grab bag of questions, but I have one follow-up for you, Dave, on just how that works for the developer. If they're responsible for the cost of developing that piece. Is that something that's assessed to them at development, or is that a liability that they hold until the point where the city's actually ready to develop? That's just, I guess, for my own curiosity of how that works. But I have just a few random questions from all the materials that we received. I would love a little bit more clarification on what the water rights situation really means, what severance of the water rights means for the people that would potentially be moving onto these houses, buying these properties. My understanding is that it means that they may be assessed some water bill for potential just being part of that district, even though they have no access to that water. It sounded like it would be a small amount, but I just would love to hear a little bit more about that. And there also was mention about updates to the floodplain mapping that FEMA and DNRC are conducting. And I wanted to see if we have any information about when those updates would happen, if there's any projected effect to this area that we should have, kind of on the radar. I think that's it for now.
Well, maybe I can tackle River Road and start there. And so, the way it typically works with subdivision, the developer is required to, and the real trigger that you have or that the city has, or the county, whatever it might be, is requiring the developer to make certain improvements prior to final plat filing. That's kind of that's the end date where improvements need to be made. And so typically the subdivider will install water lines, sewer lines, streets, sidewalks, street trees, all of those things prior to approval or filing of the final plat. But under Montana law, subdividers have an option to enter into an agreement. They call it a subdivision improvements agreement with the city or the county, in this case, the city. And so what happens is the subdivider provides a design and a construction estimate for, let's say, River Road improvements. So again, that would be boulevard, sidewalk, drainage, things like that. The city engineers would review and approve it or negotiate or whatever it might be, but ultimately come to an agreement on what the cost would be. And there would be a contract essentially where the subdivider and the city would enter into a contract. The subdivider would put up money, a certain amount of money. Typically it's 100, something like, 100% of the cost plus an additional 25 for contingencies, 25%, I mean, for contingencies or something like that. I don't know specifically. I've only worked at the city for a couple of years, so I don't know all of the specifics on how the city does it. But in this case, it would be a subdivision improvements agreement that the subdivider would enter into, provide financial security to the city to make those improvements when River Road is updated.
Great, thank you, Dave. Does anybody want to address the water rights issue?
Alex, would you like me to try to hit that a little bit?
Yes.
All right, I can take a crack at it. I can try. So this gets very confusing. So, in a situation like all over Montana, you can imagine there are irrigation districts. And so these are areas that, back in the day were set up by local ranchers, local farmers, set up to irrigate. It was a communal type system set up to irrigate larger areas of property. And so it was, a district was a way to kind of get together and to provide water, a certain amount of water to a certain number of acres, and to split the cost for things like, diversion of water from a stream, in this case it's the Clark Fork, to install ditches and turnouts or laterals to different properties and things like that. So it's kind of a communal system where people work together. As property like this gets divided, here we have the Orchard Homes Irrigation District. And so this district has water rights from back in, around the turn of the century, not long after the turn of the century, was when the water rights were filed for the Orchard Homes Irrigation District. And so now we're looking at, places, it's not unique to Missoula, it's all over the state of Montana and all over the West for that matter, where properties are being redeveloped and, there are downstream irrigators that need to get their water, and development happening between kind of the diversion, or in this case, the Clark Fork, and, the water flows through their property. So this property, it's frankly quite confusing, and Alex and I don't have it 100% nailed down at the moment, but we're working with the city attorney to try to come up with a resolution. The Montana Subdivision and Plating Act provides some guidance and some requirements in situations like this when subdivided property is subject to water rights, and it provides some options for subdividers. And in this, so the subdivider could theoretically provide water to all of the lots if the subdivider were to install like ditches, along backyards and that sort of thing. But it's really not practical in a situation like this, where you've got, potentially 19 homes on, 4,000, 5,000 square foot lots. So what typically happens is the subdivider will just basically relinquish or sever the water rights, relinquish claim to the water rights. However, the irrigation district needs to stay solvent. There are other irrigators, there are bills to pay. And so I don't mean to get too long-winded about this, but I guess the point is, it's very likely that the future homeowners will still be charged on their tax bill for the costs of their proportional share of the irrigation district, but they won't receive the water. And so, we're in subdivisions like this, we're trying to figure out how to make that work. Essentially, we don't want to put undue burden on the irrigation district, but at the same time, we want to notify people that, hey, you're going to be assessed, you won't receive water, and that's just the way of it. What the costs actually are to each homeowner, I don't know. I can't imagine. I think it was about $40, $45, Alex. I believe we heard from Al Brule, who's the head of this district. So it's a subject, it's kind of a difficult situation. I don't think it's insurmountable in this case, but I hope that provides some context for you.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
And I can touch on the last item you had about the floodplain. So I don't know how long ago it started, but they did start to do data collection on the Clark Fork River remapping project. At this point, though, there's preliminary draft maps that have not been released yet. And originally it was supposed to be for January this year. that got then pushed to, I think it's now set for April. And so there's no kind of conclusive thing for this area in terms of even a regulation that we have or even draft preliminary maps to base anything off of. We just know that it could be affected, but we don't have, it's almost too soon to really have it be related to the regulations. We'll have to just see what the draft maps come up with, draft preliminary maps come up with in a couple months. And it's just happened before.
Great, thank you, Alex, for hitting that last point there. Does anybody else got anything to address to Micah's questions? If not, I'm gonna move on to Ellie. All right, go ahead, Ellie.
So just looking at the maps with Carter Court and the setbacks, so it seems like they have variances for the setbacks to approach that subdivision just in a different format. So they looked for variances on setbacks versus the variances on the road design to be able to do the Carter Court setup.
I'm not familiar enough with the specifics of that subdivision to confirm for sure. I can definitely look into that though and let you know. If it was part of the RT10 zoning district when it was subdivided, that 20-foot rear would have been applied. And so they could have gotten a variance at that time to, I think someone mentioned it's 11 feet, not 20. So they could have addressed it at that time.
Oh, so it might have been different zoning than at the time of subdivision. Like there's
depending on when it was subdivided, yes.
Okay, thank you.
It was a special zoning district that was created specifically for that project. It was on one of Alex's initial slides. It showed the zoning, and it was so it's a subdivision. Basically, it's exactly the same size property that has 14 lots, 14 residential lots. In this case, there's 19 that's proposed in the current subdivision before you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ellie. So I have Tung and then Shane after that. Go ahead, Tung.
Yeah, so building off of what Ellie was asking, I wanted to get the opportunity to address some of the concerns that have been raised, in particular on the variances. But the way I'm reading it, and I think you, Alex, kind of alluded to this as well, is that given the property size and the current zoning requirements, many of those variances would have to be granted regardless of any kind of development, right? I mean, especially the road width size in particular, and the block size. Like two of those seem like they would have to most likely be done with any development. Is that a fair assessment?
I believe that's what Joe touched on, but yes, I mean, whether you have 10 lots or 19, you still have to have access to all of them. And the setbacks will be the same in either scenario. It's that 20-foot rear and 20-foot front, and that's the big kind of hindrance here. Because again, it's just a long, skinny parcel. So that's why we did, staff worked with the developer and IMEG to come up with, the right-of-way and the easements to function as part of the right-of-way, but kind of give a little bit more of a buffer to that front setback to not be so, it would be almost not buildable in that case.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, Alex, you had a slide kind of showing the hammerhead design of the fire turnaround earlier on your presentation, and I was wondering if I could stare at that again. My recollection was that the the widths of the hammerhead were 20 feet, but the incoming road needed to be 26, and I'm wondering if this actual design has been cleared by the fire marshal. So it's the 26 that I guess I'm a little bit concerned about, in that in theory, you've only got 22.5 feet of effective roadway leading into that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. The fire marshal has reviewed this and they did approve it. There is the 29.5 foot right away. I see what you're saying. You're talking about just the 26 feet being, I don't know if that refers to the right of way specifically or just the actual road width or the driving lanes, what that entails completely. But the fire department did review and approve this turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, if they've approved the actual, I saw the email correspondence, and it in theory, it seemed like it would work. It just seems like the math on the, if you need a 26-foot roadway and you've got a 7-foot drive lane, that puts you at the 33 feet, which is the recommended roadway in this area, right? And so I just wanted to make sure that everything was kosher on that side of things before we start, voting on variance requests for making the road narrower.
I think I understand. So I don't know if this slide helps. It's that cross-section view of all of Road A. So kind of just from, this would be the property line where the easements start. And so there's the 2 feet for curb and gutter. You have your 10-foot travel lane, another 10-foot travel lane, the 7-foot parking lane, which includes the curb and gutter component, and then you hit the property line again. I don't know if that addresses or kind of helps clarify your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does. Except I guess what I'm seeing is that, we've got a 29-foot dimension, face of curb to face of curb. And if we need 26 feet for a fire truck to get in there, then, the 29.5 feet minus the 7 feet for the parked car is 22.5 feet, not the 26 as shown in the diagram.
I understand what you're saying. Specifically, that wasn't pointed out as an issue, but I don't have any additional info on that. I'm happy to follow up though with fire to see if that may have been overlooked by any means.
Yes, Shane, I've had several conversations with the fire department on different development projects, and what I believe the International Fire Code requires and the City of Missoula requires is 20 feet of unobstructed travel way. So I think that meets IFC standards, and so the two 20-foot travel lanes suffice. I know it doesn't meet exactly with what that cul-de-sac, that 26-foot drawing shows, or that hammerhead turnaround shows, that illustration, but it's my experience working with fire that they're satisfied with 20 feet of unobstructed traveled way.
Okay.
I also see that Danny has his hands up. Danny, do you want to chime in on this?
I think it just got addressed, Danny Oberweiser with IMEG. I just wanted to add to help mitigate Shane's concern. The parking lane doesn't extend all the way to the end of the hammerhead. Parking has to be set back, I believe, 30 feet from the end. So it's actually 27 feet wide travel lane at the end of the road before it turns into the cul-de-sac. So it does meet that fire code diagram there.
Great, thank you for that input there, Danny. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? I have a couple, but I want to give everybody else a chance to address. Dave, Loomis, I haven't heard from you at all. That's kind of unusual.
Let me just say for the record, I'm very familiar with the site and been through it many times and was involved in the Carter Court project back in the day. So I have no comments so far. All the questions are good, totally relevant to everything. I'm listening in. It's a tough one. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Always appreciate your input. So everybody's done such a good job. I don't have too many questions here. Alex, I just wanted to verify that is the max number of units with the RT zoning, that is 10, like that's the max number of units that could go in here?
The current zoning RT10 is a maximum of 10 units here right now. And then the RT 5.4, the density goes to 19.
Okay, and this question might be a little more applicable for Joe or any of the IMEG staff, but was it at any time considered to look at, I believe there was 2 zoning in between 10 and 5.4 and 8, and I can't remember what the other one, but was there any consideration given to those zoning applications by any chance?
Hey, Paul, you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, Paul Forsting, IMEG. We've worked on several projects in this growth policy designation. It allows for 3 to 11 units per acre. It's the residential medium density. And for every project we've worked on in this designation, maybe up to 5 now of them, one just down the street that you might remember, just west of here, we got approved last year. All of them were going to RT 5.4. And so we based on that kind of previous coordination with the city, we thought that was a good match to go here. There's an R8 designation, which gives you a couple more units, but then you lose the townhouse ability. So you go from RT10 to R8, lose the townhouse. And then there's the other designation is just R5.4 with no T, so no townhouses. And then there's RT 5.4. And so this has been a natural fit. It gets you 8 units per acre. And so it's right in the middle of that 3 to 11 recommended growth policy designation. But no, we really hadn't considered any other ones. This fit best for our site.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that, Paul. That's a great clarification there. Just a second. Let me review my notes really quick. And I think everything question-wise I had already got asked. Shane, go ahead.
I maybe wanted to bring up the question about the notification of residents within a certain radius, just to touch on that. And maybe Alex, you could maybe speak to what the radius is and where that's measured from.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shane, for that reminder. And Alex, do you need a reminder on that question at all? Do you remember?
I do remember, thank you. So there's 2 different components to that. The subdivision requires notification to all adjacent property owners. And that needs to be first class mail, might be mixing that up. And then rezoning requires notifications to all property owners within 150 feet of the property line. So we did do 2 different sets of notifications, one first class, one certified mail. I'm sorry, the subdivision certified mail. But and so our GIS department put this map together to show it as a visual because I'm curious. I did check all the blue. I believe the concern was the orchard homes on the east did not get notification. But they were all the blue is included in what we did notify. And the letters we printed have all of those addresses and were sent out. So I'm not sure what happened there. Do you, Sean, remember who made that specific comment? Because we will be with the city council date changes. We're going to be re-notifying. And so it would be good to maybe touch base with someone to make sure there wasn't, because as far as I am able to see, everything was sent. The only difference between the 2 would have been the properties on the left were adjacent to the subdivision. So they got the certified mail versus the other properties were not adjacent, but within the buffer. So they got the regular mail. So that would really be the only difference. But so yeah, I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, Alex, I did not make a note to ask the question. I want to say that it might have been Sue Polich. But if that individual is still here, maybe send an email out to Alex with the city, and you can re-ask that question, and maybe she can get back to you specifically about that.
If I remember correctly, it was the Kate Fizzle Fizell name that came
Okay.
back.
Right. That's correct, if you can hear me.
We can, Kate. Great,
Okay.
great job, Shane.
Thanks.
All right, nice job, folks. Thanks for helping me remember that and remembering who asked the question. Okay, I think we are ready to make a motion or perhaps several motions. So I don't know, maybe we should talk about how we want to address this. Do folks want to try and make, I don't know, a motion with all the variances or multiple motions for discussion? It seems like we're going to be talking about everything all at once. Or do folks feel like we can break this out into each motion and variance? Because I believe we have, let's see, 6 separate motions to make and vote on. But the discussion as a whole may be inclusive of the entire thing. So any ideas how we want to proceed, or should we just take it one at a time?
Is it helpful if I share my screen?
I think it would be very helpful. Thank you, Alex. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I would think we'd vote first on the zoning change, because if it fails, the variances are moot, correct? Or not?
Recommendation to me in pre-meeting from staff, procedurally speaking, was to work our way through the variances. And then I believe the subdivision motion comes after the variances, which now includes the memo number 1 with the water rights issues. And then the final motion would be the rezone. And if there's a correction on staff or maybe an explanation on why procedurally that makes the most sense, I don't have an answer for Rick about that.
It would be okay if you guys want to start with the rezone first, that's no problem.
Okay, sorry folks, I'm having a little interruption here, specifically a short 5-year-old. What I'm going to ask for some opinions on this one. Procedurally, it was recommended to me that we start with the variances. I don't have a preference. It does make sense to me to, start with the rezone, but Shane, you got any feeling on this?
Not really. I mean, I think that I'd like to get the tenor of what folks are feeling, which requires a motion to be on the table. So I want to I want to have some discussion about it, and whether we can do that with just the first variance motion. Dave's probably a better one to ask procedurally than I am, I'd say.
Yeah, Dave Loomis, why don't you jump in here? I feel like you have some good input.
Well, I agree with Rick Hall. I think you need to make the zoning decision first. And if it goes down, then everything is moot, as Rick said. And then if it passes, then I believe you take apart the variances and vote one by one. I think that would get you where you need to go.
Outstanding. Does anybody I see some hands going down. We'll go ahead and go to Dory first and then Rick for comment.
Thanks. I just have a quick question. I just want to make sure I understand something, because I thought what I heard tonight was that regardless of whether this property was rezoned or not, that many of these variances would still be before us. Is that correct?
I think there is the potential for that to be the case, even under the R10 zoning, yes. And the variances might change depending on how, the developers proceed. But yes, I believe that was correct.
Thank you.
And then go ahead, Rick.
I mean, generally, if we don't approve the rezone, it may not be financially feasible for the developer to even move forward. So the reason I raised my hand is I'm willing to float the motion for the rezone if we're ready for that.
I think we are, and I think that's the appropriate place to start. If you want to float that motion, please do.
Okay, I move that we approve the adoption of an ordinance to rezone the subject property located at 1923 River Road from RT10 residential 2-unit townhouse to RT 5.4 residential 2-unit townhouse based on the findings of facts and conclusions of law in the staff report.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Second.
Seconded first by Toon. And we have a motion on the table, which opens us up for discussion. Does anybody want to kick that off? Go ahead, Ellie.
I do hear all the concerns of the Carter Court residents with this, and I also do think that this is a really good space for a subdivision, both with access to services, access to parks, the slated improvements that are for River Road coming down the pipeline. I kind of second what both Dory and Sean said before, that like it does feel like we're putting the cart before the horse sometimes with the developments, but then the infrastructure does come into those spaces, and that with Dory, that this really is a part of the growth policy. And so I'm inclined to support this rezone and the variances to make it possible to do some more density. I guess I could leave it there and kind of like see how the discussion goes, because I'm really curious about how other people feel about this. And yeah, leave it there.
Great, thanks, Ellie. Micah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really hear all the concerns too, and I am not totally sure that I'm ready to vote yes on this change. I do feel like it's a lot of variances, and one of the commenters kind of took a word out of my head with like, why do we have standards if we're going to have so many variances and try to really shoehorn into a property of this size? But I understand all the work that's gone into developing the proposal, and that, it is a very skinny parcel, and there are variances at play with the the neighboring units that are complicating factors too. Really, one thing that's helping me feel like I could vote yes is knowing that there is if not fully defined timeline, there is a timeline for River Road to be upgraded, because as it is not it is not cut out for the work that it's being asked to do, and for us to be putting in additional units with no plan in place for how that road is going to be upgraded. That feels a bit different. So hearing that was helpful for me, but I'm really interested in the conversation that we have here, and am not certain.
All right, I'm not seeing any hands up at the moment. Oh, wait, go ahead, Dory, and then Rick.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have, I'm inclined to support this, but I have a lot of reservations. And I think my reservations are really, again, just about wanting to do better. I feel like this is an appropriate place for a subdivision. I feel like it could be a better subdivision. I spoke already to some of the, things, my feelings around that, and consistent with the growth policy and the spirit of that, which is, there's a lot of community investment in planning for the future of Missoula, and Certainly more houses are needed, but specific types of more houses are needed. And ideally, I just want to encourage developers and the agencies working with them to, think more broadly about the greater good with these projects, and just really encourage us to do better. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Dory. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I certainly understand the concerns of the neighbors because growth is always a concern. My experience, transportation improvements and infrastructure improvements follow growth, not the other way around. So very rarely is a road improved before the development is forcing it to be critical or almost near failure. Unfortunately, that's just how it works. But for me, my question was, does it align with the future growth policy and plans for Missoula? And it appears to. Shared wall townhomes tend to be on the affordable end. We can't, we certainly can't affect affordability. That's a market equation that is determined by supply. And I think that this, when you look at what the developer is doing, I don't think it's just based on, I know a lot of people may feel it's based on greed, but the more housing you make available, the lower the cost of housing, hopefully sometime down the road for people that want to be in the housing market. So anyway, that's my two cents about it.
Great, thank you, Rick. I have Toon next.
I plan on voting for this. I think it's addresses a lot of the needs the community has in terms of housing. Obviously, very sympathetic to the very passionate feedback that we got from the public today, and I do appreciate that. But my view was that a lot of the objections were objections to growth in general, and also some concerns around the infrastructure of the current neighborhood, which I don't think are necessarily going to be impacted one way or the other by this development. Clearly, there's already some parking issues. There's obviously been a lot of discussion around River Road. And so I feel like those are independent of this development. And then specifically, I think Micah raised it as well. It was a really compelling argument about why have standards, and if we had to make all these variances. But as we discussed, these variances are gonna be required of any future development because of just the geography of that land. And as far as standards, our standards are changing. We, 2 meetings ago, we had a very extensive presentation about the impending rezoning that's going to be happening. Things have changed quite a bit, and I think as a result, neighborhoods are going to change a little bit as well. And I think we have to embrace that. This is the kind of discussion that we're going to be having a lot in the next few years. And again, as sympathetic as I am to the feedback we got, I think I'm in favor of development because that's what Missoula needs right now. So that's my perspective.
I'm getting an internet unstable here. Hopefully I'm still coming across all right. Ellie.
Some of the things that I keep thinking about are really continuing on the thread that Dory was on of I think we could do better in terms of the design. And I almost feel like the zoning isn't even good enough to allow for that creative design so that the space could have been used in a more clever way than doing the 2 unit townhouses, almost like it could be something that was a little more density and then a little more openness would solve some of those challenges down the line, things we've talked about through some of Andrew's trainings with the county rezone. Similarly, I'm thinking and hearing the concerns about all the parking. I keep thinking about how some of those parking restrictions we've been talking about might be, or some of the parking requirements might be going away for some of the future development within the city, so that there's less parking required and more reliance on busing and the public infrastructure to kind of take on the needs of the community in that way, as opposed to in a more sustainable way. And so I'm really hopeful that there'll be continued growth in those components of infrastructure in this neighborhood, so that it relieves some of those parking concerns for the long term.
Great, thanks, Ellie. I'm not at the moment seeing anybody else's hands up. I guess I'll take a moment here. Oh, I see Shane. Go ahead, Shane.
Sean, I popped up at the last minute. I didn't know if I was going to say anything. You know, I lived across the street from this development for a couple of years a while ago, and you know, I intend to support you know, the rezone and subdivision and the variances. You know, this is an area of town that I think could have used some good planning in the past, and you know, the result of that is a lot of these, you know, dead end cul-de-sac, you know, developments, and that's what it's growing into. And it is hard to get in and out of this area, and River Road does kind of suffer from that. You know, it's the one road that you can get, you know, through from Russell to Reserve on, you know, all the way down to, what is it, 3rd Street or something like that. So, I mean, River Road certainly needs to be addressed, and that's a different discussion for a different department. I think that this development meets the criteria that has been laid out before us. Like I said, I intend to support it. I do disagree with these dead end cul-de-sac situations in a lot of ways, but that is it's just what's in this area because of lack of through streets. So I guess that's my piece.
Thank you, Shane. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I want to make everybody understands this, that the city of Missoula is at fault here. They've known about the River Road issue for what, 20, 30 years, and they haven't done anything about it. I'm sorry for the Carter Court folks. They raise a good point, but you know, their subdivision was then and really well designed, and I'm glad they appreciate it, and it's and therefore on balance, this particular rezoning does meet the goals of the city for the future. I don't generally favor variances either. Variance, if you're going to make this subdivision work, yes, you need these variants. So in general, I support the rezoning and the subdivision, and the city of Missoula is on notice after 25 more years. You got a problem out there on River Road. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I think I'll go ahead and put my own 2 cents in here. I'm really on the fence with this one. A lot of it is because I don't necessarily agree that this fits the growth policy very well. And in particular, criterions A and B impact on ag land and water. And I know I'm the farmer on the board, and my farm is right down the road from this. And I don't know how the NRCS gets their designation of 114, but I've been on this piece of property. I've dug holes. It's got good soil. Most of this neighborhood has fantastic soil, my house included. And the finding of fact that this is not impacting agricultural land, I disagree with wholeheartedly. That's just wrong. Now, one could also point out that there are already 2 farms in this neighborhood, and there are a few other agricultural pieces across the street. but I don't see that finding of fact as being accurate. This is good ag land. Another provision that I see that's really challenging is this water rights ditch issue. I know for a fact that these folks may, if the Orchard Homes ditch cooperative decides to send them a bill, they can. I get one every year and we don't get a lick of water. And the reason we don't get a lick of water is because of a subdivision development down off of Curtis didn't do their due diligence, and they didn't create all the things that needed to be created so that water could still be diverted to our part of that ditch system. And so, I've got an empty cistern that I get charged for every year that I can't get water out of if I wanted to. And I want to as a farmer. So, just those aspects of it are making it really difficult for me to support this. And, the other part about the variances and whether or not our current zoning is enough is also really weighing heavily on me. However, having been on this board now for a couple of years, I am well aware that, as Dave pointed out, that the city is at great fault here for not rezoning. At this point, if the county can get it together, then I don't understand why the city can't get it together. Particularly since they've been being asked for rezoning, particularly by this board, for I'm not even sure how long, but for a while. So I don't know. Listening to everybody else, I may support this motion. I support development, right? I see the need. I do question whether or not this is not fiscally viable at the R10 zoning, particularly with today's current market. Today's current market is astronomical. And whether you got, 10 or 19 on there, you're gonna sell them at a high price. However, that doesn't necessarily take into account staff's hard work and IMEG's hard work. And all of those considerations, I think, need to be taken in when we approve these things, as well as the community's outreach. I feel for the Carter Court folks. I hear what they're saying, absolutely. I'm not sure if I personally see the difference between the number of homes. The setbacks are going to be the same and the heights are going to be the same. So, one, wall of houses is a little different. If we were talking about some of the things that are going in on people's property lines that are 40 and 50 feet tall, then I probably would stand against this. But since there is so little difference between the two zonings and the fact that our 5.4, we did just down the road, helped me lean towards approving this. So I'll probably stay on the fence until we vote. And I guess that's all I got at the moment. This is a tough one, and I knew it was going to be a tough one before we got here. And so I just appreciate everybody's patience and taking the time to consider this. And with that, I'm going to go to Ellie and then Dory.
Thanks. I really hear you, Sean, on the ag land component. I am also a farmer and I'm a non-land owning farmer, and this site is mouthwatering in terms of the kinds of agriculture that you and I do. And I also think that this development serves a higher use for Missoula right now in becoming housing, which is really piercing for me to say. But with that location, and I realize you're right down the road, but with that location now kind of being the heart of Missoula, it feels like that as we're growing, that is really a great place for services. to be accessible for new homes. And it's part of why I'm inclined to change the zoning and fit more density, because I think that that will help serve keeping agricultural land in other sites slightly further out than this one.
Thank you, Ellie. Go ahead, Dory.
Just real quickly, I want to say that, while what I've seen today and what I've read indicates that, this proposal fits with the letter of the law in a very basic way in terms of the subdivision review criteria. But I would, for the record, just raise the question about the public health and safety criteria, which has bullets for, the contribution to goals for housing, infrastructure, economic development, and resource conservation. Again, I just want to reiterate that, yes, on the one hand, this contributes to the goals for housing, but not as much as it could, because again, we are just building more houses, but they're not necessarily attainable houses. They're not houses that reflect sort of the sustainable goals of the community as detailed in the growth policy. And there's another bullet about preservation of community character, which I question. I think I'm hearing from a lot of people this sort of reservation around, recommending approval for yet another subdivision that's, it's very meh, I guess. And then last, I'll just say, again, I just want to reiterate and certainly encourage council to consider that, while this is consistent with the growth policy in some ways, I would argue that it's not wholly consistent. And again, I just want to encourage us as a community to work toward being more wholly consistent. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dory. Is there any other comments or discussion points before we move to a vote on this motion? All righty. We will move for a vote then. I think, Donna, I'm going to call for a roll call vote on this one, please.
Very good. Ellie Costello.
Aye.
Ellie Costello votes yes. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Dory Gilels.
Yes.
Dory Gilels votes yes. Sierra Farmer.
Yes.
Sierra Farmer votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Rick Hall.
Yes.
Rick Hall votes yes. Shane Morrissey.
Yes.
Shane Morrissey votes yes. Sean McCoy. Sean McCoy.
Oh, sorry, I had a break in my reception there. Nay.
Sean McCoy votes no. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone else. Okay, so let's proceed. If somebody would do, I think we'll move on to the subdivision motion. Seems to be the most reasonable next step. Somebody would like to entertain a motion for that.
I move to approve the Riverview subdivision preliminary plat application subject to the recommended conditions of approval based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report as amended in memo number 1 dated February 11th, 2022.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Rick, I believe. And does anybody feel a need for discussion on the subdivision at this time? Did we get it all out in the previous discussion? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. So Donna, let's go ahead and proceed with a roll call vote.
Dave's hand is up.
Yeah, just as a point of order, I think it may be more appropriate to address the variances first, because if the variances are not approved, it would be difficult to approve the overall subdivision.
Ah, okay.
Alex, would you
That,
like to show the motions?
That does make sense. My apologies, y'all. Okay, we'll backtrack there. And would somebody like to make a motion for the first variance relating to street size is the simplest way to put it.
Do we need to withdraw the previous motion or not?
I'm unclear on the procedure there. Staff?
Or maybe just put it on hold?
Yeah, let's, so I'll move here to table the previous motion regarding the subdivision. And we will move forward with a motion for variance number 1 in relation to the size of the streets.
I can make the motion. I did maybe have a question before I do. Should we just attack all 4 variances since they would all need to be approved in order for the subdivision to work? And maybe that's the question for Dave.
That would be fine if you're comfortable doing them all at once. I think that would be fine. If you want to tackle them one by one, if there's some dissension or some discussion among the board, then you could break it up.
I'm okay with tackling them all together. Does anybody feel like we should take them one at a time? I don't even think you have to feel strongly. All right. Would somebody like to take a stab at reading all 4 of the variances and making a combined motion?
Sure. I will move that we approve variance number 1. So approval of the variance to request to allow a 29.5-foot wide right-of-way to 25.5-foot wide street width with 1 7-foot wide parking lane and 2 20-foot wide easements containing 7-foot wide boulevards, 5-foot wide sidewalks, and an 8-foot wide utility easements. Move to approve variance number 2, approval of the variance request to allow for a turnaround street road A, further approving the variance from specified turnaround design standards, including the requirements that turnarounds may not represent more than 15% of the total roadway miles in a subdivision. The right-of-way radius must be a minimum of 50 feet and the pavement width must be a minimum of 45 feet. Variance number 3, approval of the variance request to allow a block length of, at roughly 534 feet. And variance number 4, approval of the variance request to allow the existing River Road 60-foot wide right-of-way and proposed roadway and proposed improvements.
Is there a need on anybody's part for discussion related to any of the variances within the motion?
I just wanted to commend Shane on his reading and second his motion.
Thank you, thank you. I'm getting ahead of myself. We got a ways to go still tonight. Thank you for the second, Tung, and also a very good job, Shane. Now, is there any desire for discussion on the combined variances motion? Or are we ready to proceed to a vote? Looks like we're ready to proceed. So Donna, could we do another roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Ellie Costello.
I vote yes.
Ellie Costello votes yes. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Dory Galels.
Yes.
Dory Galels votes yes. Sierra Farmer.
Yes.
Sierra Farmer votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Rick Hall.
Yes.
Rick Hall votes yes. Shane Morrissey.
Yes.
Shane Morrissey votes yes. Sean McCoy.
Nay.
Sean McCoy votes no. Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so doing great here, folks. The last motion up for us would be the subdivision motion. If somebody could make that motion, that would be great.
That is the motion that was previously moved by Micah.
Oh,
Sewell,
that
second.
motion was tabled, and I'm sorry, I forgot who made the motion.
That was me.
Very good. So the motion for the subdivision was made by Micah. Does anybody need that reread, or would somebody like to second that?
I'll second.
Seconded first by Shane. And if anybody needs it reread before we vote, just let me know here. Okay, it doesn't look like we need any rereading. So Donna, could we have one more roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Ellie Costello.
Yes.
Ellie Costello votes yes. Tun Pham.
Yes.
Tun Pham votes yes. Dory Galels.
Yes.
Dory Galels votes yes. Sierra Farmer.
Yes.
Sierra Farmer votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Rick Hall.
Yes.
Rick Hall votes yes. Shane Morrissey.
Yes.
Shane Morrissey votes yes. Sean McCoy.
Yes.
Sean McCoy votes yes. Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, everybody. That concludes this portion of our agenda. Thank you very much to staff for all your presentation, and to IMEG for everybody hanging in there. I know there was a lot of discussion, but we appreciate you guys sticking around to answer questions and being available. I see, Rick, do you have a question?
I believe we have another presentation coming up. I was just, for the old guys, could I stretch my legs and could we maybe have a 5-minute break before that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was gonna recommend we take a 5-minute break here. So I will start that at 8:44 and we'll reconvene at 8:48. So get yourself some water and stretch your legs, and we'll be back with a presentation from Andrew Hegemeyer on our county rezoning code.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Hopefully everybody's had enough time. I'll give everybody another minute or so here to jump back on and finish up whatever you needed to do. For me, I had to go check on the kids. Let's see. All right, it looks like, I think I'm seeing everybody. Okay, I think we got everybody. Let's go ahead and dive back into this and see if we can make our way through the rest of tonight's agenda. So that's the toughest part. Next part of the agenda, we have communications and special presentations. We have a presentation from Andrew Hegemeyer relating to the Missoula County Zoning Code update. And so, sorry, I'm bouncing back between Zoom and my agenda. So I'm assuming Andrew is here still. Go ahead, Andrew, you got the floor.
Hey, hola, Sean, thank you. Hello to the rest of the board. Really good job on that tough subdivision. We were chatting on our teams, talking, we were impressed with the way you approach these complicated issues. We've got the second of our two special presentations on the Missoula County Zoning Code. With me tonight is Jenny Dixon, Lindsay Romanello will both be presenting, and Karen Hughes is also in attendance tonight as well, some of the county staff. We will try to keep it to the point, but this is an important topic, and so definitely keep the latitude to well, we want to keep the latitude to have a discussion once we're done. So, but we'll try to keep to the point as possible. Let me figure out how to share my screen again. I always forget it's the big green button. And you should be seeing my screen, the PowerPoint.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
We've kind of got all the, there you go. There you go, Andrew. Looks great.
All right. Yeah, so this is the second of an informational presentation on the upcoming hearing on the zoning code. For those members of if there is any members of the public still listening, or maybe going to watch this on MCAT or at a different time on YouTube, tonight is informational. We're trying to get the planning board prepared for a very important hearing that will be on March 1st. And so March 1st will be our public hearing with the planning board on the proposed zoning code. March 15th, we have scheduled it for a continuation if necessary. I think it would almost certainly be necessary given the breadth of this topic. There might be other things on the agenda on March 15th, but we've coordinated with the city and other county planning staff to keep the March 1st hearing just for the zoning code. If you're interested as a member of the public on how to participate in this project, we have a really fancy website, mczoningupdate.com. That would be a great place to find all the information. You can submit written comments, which we highly suggest you do, and also links and instructions on how to participate in the hearing. Sorry. So our objectives for these two hearings was to, we're going to review all of the ones that we presented last week as well. So is to get the planning board up to speed on the code structure and how to find details within the code. We covered that last meeting. We wanted to get the planning board up to speed on the code foundation and how we develop the code. Again, covered that last week. Tonight, we're going to talk more about the big picture concepts within the code and how they address some of the really important issues that we're facing as a community. We'll talk about some of our capabilities and limitations within zoning. There are constraints that we work within. We also want to talk about the planning board's special role in this process. So informational meeting one, just showing that for background, and then informational meeting 2, which is tonight. We'll talk about the opportunities and constraints related to zoning. We'll talk about how the code addresses some of these big issues in the hearing preparation. So the opportunities and constraints. We're gonna, these big issues that we're facing as a community, we've touched on a few of them. Well, in the last presentation, housing obviously being one, sustainability is another one, ag is one. I mean, we kind of hit on most of the big issues in that last presentation. They're big problems, big issues. They need big solutions. Zoning is just one tool in the toolbox to try to adjust these. So here's what we'll kind of walk through: housing, local ag, resource protection, and clean energy. These are the opportunities that we have within the code. Some of the issues that we're facing as in the community that we have opportunities to try to address. So some of the considerations that we have to put into developing this code that I want the planning board to be aware of, because it is complex, and the planning board doesn't often get an opportunity to have conversations about some of the things that are running through the planners' minds, especially when we're developing growth policies or zoning codes. Specifically to zoning codes, and this is one that I know the planning boards get, is that the zoning code must follow the growth policy, right? It must be made in accordance with the growth policy. So we developed a growth policy in 2016. We further refined it with the Missoula area land use element, which was adopted in 2019. Our proposed zoning code is an implementation of that 2019 land use element. I mean, there is a direct correlation between these two documents. Within that land use element, which is a component of our growth policy, is a land use map. I just wanted to specifically talk about the role between the land use map and the zoning map. The land use map is our vision. It's our description of future conditions. It's perhaps a 20-year outcome, development outcome in the community, where we want growth to go and where we want our resources to be protected. When we have a land use designation like residential, the state law sort of dictates that we can't zone it industrial. So if we have a land use designation of residential, we need to zone it for residential. Now, there's a discrepancy there. There's a difference there. While our land use map is a description of desired future conditions, our zoning map is a little bit more of a representation of the existing conditions as they are today. A really good example is our land use map forecasts growth over 20 years. So we're projecting where infrastructure is going to be extended in the future in our land use map, while today that infrastructure is not there. So you might see situations, well, you will see situations on the land use map and the zoning map where they aren't the same. And that's mainly because of this, where we have projected in the future there will be infrastructure necessary to support growth and development. However, that infrastructure is not in place today. And so the zoning does not reflect that infrastructure. So it reflects more of a current conditions. So that's a big parameter that we have to work within in updating the growth policy or updating the zoning code is that relationship to the growth policy. The second thing is capacity. And I think this gets overlooked quite a bit, but we've been really thinking about this a lot when we've been designing this code, is what is the county's staffing capacity necessary to implement this code, to execute this code in the proper way. Our staffing, it's a hard truth, but our staffing right now is sort of maxed out. We've experienced a lot more development recently, and we're at capacity. We're pretty tight. We do believe we have, the proposed code is going to require more capacity as we've designed it today, but we've tried to limit that necessary need for capacity as much as we can. But there are some really important parts of this code that demand that we add the capacity. The commissioners are well aware of this, and as the code gets closer to adoption, we're very hopeful that the capacity that's necessary to implement the code is put in place. But, however, we are trying to keep the code realistic in terms of our capacity to be able to implement it. The third item is our planner skills and training. Planners are kind of generalists. We have a lot of different skills, a lot of different trainings, but we're not everything. There are certain things that are outside our range of expertise and our range of skill sets to be able to complete. And so in designing this code, we definitely tried to design it for the planners to be able to execute. And we tried to keep out elements in it that we might want to put in, but the reality is as planners, we don't have the skills or training to implement. This is sort of a hypothetical situation, but I wanted to just give an example to help illustrate this point. Is planners are not botanists. So you don't see things in the code about planners trying to manage vegetation, for example. So fourth constraint is state law. There are state laws in how we process and adopt the zoning code, which isn't too much of a concern because we're following those procedures. We can get a little sideways sometimes. We have to keep, I should say, we should really keep our eyes out for how our zoning code might overlap with other state laws and make sure that they are consistent with each other. Right now, we feel like we've designed a zoning code that doesn't have any issues, but it is a constraint and it sometimes limits our ability to do some things. Moving on is court precedents. This is something that's, I would never expect the planning board to know. It's something that planners study land use law. We are not attorneys, but we study it. But we also have attorneys, with the county who are land use attorneys, and we work with them and have been working with them on this code adoption. But there is court precedence here in the state of Montana that does sometimes restrict our abilities to do some things. And if we get into discussions at any point in the process, we'll be pointing these things out to you. I'm not going to go into details. Moving on again is existing entitlements. So existing zoning, the zoning we have in place today is an entitlement. So we might have zoned some property as residential today. That's an entitlement that they have, and we need to recognize that they have that entitlement in place today. So we wouldn't want to necessarily zone them something significantly less than what they, in terms of entitlements, than what they have today, without very, very good justification. And that justification usually comes from the growth policy. There's also subdivisions that are out there that have been approved that wouldn't show up on a map yet. There are other types of entitlements that are on the landscape that we need to recognize. And we feel like we've captured most of those. However, it's very possible we don't know about every single entitlement that's possible, but hopefully if we've missed any existing entitlements, we can catch them in this public process. And finally, something that can be a little awkward to recognize is state politics. This is a county. We have a different set of laws that we have to follow than cities. In the state of Montana, counties don't quite have the same powers cities do. We have fewer powers. The state has to specifically enable us to do things. Whereas in cities have the ability to do things unless the state specifically says they can't. We need to recognize, why we might have some really lofty ambitions and really lofty goals here in Missoula that Missoula doesn't set the enabling statutes for zoning. The state does. And we know from this last legislative session that this legislature has no problem with taking away rights because we did something to all communities in Montana because we did something here in Missoula. They did that with land use statutes in this last session. So we need to be careful and cognizant that that we have to be aware of what the state politics are. We don't want to overstep bounds and end up getting perhaps, you know, something as drastic as the ability for counties to have zoning taken away. And that sounds rash, but there were 3 bills this last session that tried to eliminate the county's ability to have zoning, period. And we were able to fight those off, but it was a heck of a fight. So we need to keep that in perspective. It's really important. So our challenge here is, you know, we've got all these big issues that are really important. Housing, agriculture, climate change. We can be a part of the solution to those things, but we cannot fix these big problems just through zoning. What we need to figure out as a group, us as staff and you as the board, is know when we can do more. When we're hearing comments and desires to do more, know when we can based off our constraints that we just discussed, and recognize when we're just kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I think some of that's a gut thing. Some of it is more of, I think, a planning professional experience. But I just wanted to raise this, bring this up to the board to recognize that these are considerations that we've gone through when creating the code, and they will be part of our considerations when we're talking about changes to the code that are appropriate. We will be forthright with the board when we think we can do more, and when we think we need to recognize that we have a square peg in a round hole. So talking about some of our big issues, because this is kind of exciting just from the last conversation we have. I think, you know, this is kind of the neat stuff, I think. So we'll talk about it. So we'll start really big picture. The code is implementing an overall growth management strategy for Missoula County for roughly an area from the Bonner area out to Smurfit Stone, from the Rattlesnake Mountains down to Miller Creek. This is the area that our zoning code affects. We do not have countywide zoning. And the overall growth management strategy that was developed during the 2019 land use element and as adopted as policy, and we are trying to implement with this code, focuses kind of, it can be really simply summarized. And in areas where we have identified that growth makes sense, we want to reduce barriers in residential, mixed use, and industrial districts. Reduce the barriers to development. So where we want to grow, we want to make it fairly easy to grow. In areas that we've identified that don't have quite the characteristics that we want to encourage growth in, that there are resources that are more primary or a larger concern, is we want to try to mitigate the impacts of development on those resources. And that's really where you see our open lands and agricultural zones. So that's the summary, the elevator pitch of our overall growth management strategy that the zoning code is trying to implement. And most of this work in laying this out, in doing the analysis, in looking where the infrastructure was or is, looking where our ag soils are, looking all that, most of that work, almost all of it, was done during the planning phase when we adopted the 2019 land use element. We're trying to implement that now. On to housing. Our big picture is the zoning code is focused on the supply side of the housing equation. I think you probably learned quite a bit about housing, hopefully recently, when the county brought forward our housing strategy through the planning board just before the new year, before the holidays. There's kind of there are two sides of the housing equation. One is supply side, which is market rate, and then the other is subsidies. And big picture is the zoning code is trying to address the supply side issues. We kind of saw in this last presentation the use of the term affordable housing. It can be really loosely thrown around. We see it in other development applications. We're not focused on an affordable housing solution, like trying to meet certain AMI for rentals or home buyers that you would in a typical housing strategy. We're just trying to enable housing of all types, any price point within the zoning code. So this is not the county affordable housing strategy. It is an implementation of our county affordable housing strategy. Our county affordable housing strategy identifies zoning and reducing barriers within zoning to try to get more housing supply on the market. But there are limitations. The state of Montana specifically says we cannot require affordable housing in terms of from a developer. It can't be required. So this is a supply side solution. It's important though that quality matters, and I think we this board just talked about that the quality of housing is important. I'll get into that in more detail. So despite my just a little bit of an exhaustive rant about this is not an affordable housing solution, it is not, we're not addressing it's not an affordable housing solution in terms of providing subsidized housing. We do provide incentives for subsidized housing. So if a developer proposes to do affordable housing, if they are proposing to use deed restrictions to limit the price of housing to certain AMIs, we will be happy to give them some bonuses and incentives to do so. So we're not requiring it, we're making it optional, but we're going to reward them for doing it. We are also encouraging the use of, or have enabled the use of townhome exempt development to encourage infill and home ownership. This is a big concept. I'm not going to spend too long on it, but the townhome exempt development is an exemption from subdivision review. In a way, you can create single parcels with this exemption, and we are enabling people to use that in locations where we have water and sewer and there aren't resources that we're concerned about protecting, and we're doing that to encourage infill development and home ownership. So there's a concrete step of how the county is reducing process to encourage development in the right places. We're proposing to reduce the parking mandates within the zoning code. Parking is very, very, very expensive. The research is getting pretty expansive that demonstrates that the more you require parking, that there's a direct correlation between the price of housing and the amount of parking you require. And if you want to reduce the price of housing, reduce the amount of parking mandates. So I know it's going to cause some consternation in some neighborhoods that we're taking away the required parking, but we've taken away affordable housing. So it's a solution to help address that. The biggest constraint we have in the county, and this isn't a zoning thing, is just in terms of being able to apply supply side strategies, is that we we don't have a ton of infrastructure in place in areas where we can accommodate the range of housing types we want. I was notified that I missed a slide, so I'm gonna go back. In terms of supply, what we want to do is encourage a mix of housing types. So we allow more housing types in more zones. By housing types, I mean single family, duplexes, fourplexes, multiplexes, cottage homes, tiny homes, mobile homes. We allow these things in more places. Our current zoning is pretty single family orientated. This is why we have the whole chapter on building types, chapter 3. In places where you could do an apartment building, or you could do a multiplex, or you can do a duplex, we are allowing you to do that by right. So there's no more public hearings and conditional use permits and things like that or special exceptions to do these higher density housing developments, like specific developments. It's just, if it's allowed within the zone, there is no special process. You have the right to do it, which really makes things more predictable for the development community. We are allowing in every single zone at least to have single families, duplexes, and accessory dwelling units. So that's in every zone that allows residential in the entire zoning code. And also, once you get into the higher density districts, places where we have the sewer and water, districts like neighborhood residential, neighborhood center, we have no minimum lot size requirements, which kind of gets at the ability to do creative development and design. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to Lindsay here to talk a little bit about how we are going to handle agriculture in the proposed code.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'll try and breeze through these. So agriculture lands are one of the main resources that we hear, time and time again, just are so crucial to Missoula County and Missoula County residents. And it's a resource that we really aim to mitigate the impacts of development on. And we're coming at this from a couple different angles. Drew, if you want to switch sides, great. So how we're hoping to do this. First off, we have created a specific zoning district for agriculture. We're calling this Agriculture Reserve. This is a low density zoning district. We've thought about the zoning map and zoning the planned area so that a lot of the important agriculture soils that are on large lots are concentrated in this district. So we kind of thought about where those soils are located, thought about where those parcels are, and tried to put them in this agriculture reserve district. And in this district, we are requiring development to cluster in exchange for density bonuses. We're calling this type of development conservation development. And in these developments, the more ag land you preserve and set aside, the more density you can get up to about 400% density bonus if you preserve, like, say, 90% of your ag soils. So that's a pretty big deal. We're really hoping that this incentivizes the preservation of that ag land. But we're not only requiring this type of development in ag reserve districts, we're also requiring it where there are these important ag soils in our other agriculture districts as well. So really hoping to preserve those important soils. This clustering method, these clustering and density bonuses, we're also hoping to use that to encourage the preservation of other resources. For example, archaeological or historic sites, scenic vistas, wildlife habitats, basically other resources that provide a similar kind of public benefit. Next slide, please. So the next kind of strategy is geared at permitting, kind of the diversification of the use of agriculture lands to make it so that agriculture can remain a profitable livelihood or can become a profitable livelihood. I know that that's kind of a struggle for a lot of folks in that industry. So we propose to do this firstly by making what we're calling low impact agriculture permitted everywhere, and low impact agriculture meaning farms, livestock raising and grazing, growing hay, basically all of the agriculture that we see around us in the Missoula Valley. This will be allowed in any district throughout our planning, throughout this zoning effort. The difference, so high impact agriculture, this will be a little bit more restricted to the lower density agriculture districts and industrial districts. These are, and high impact agriculture means things like feedlots, kind of an industrial scale chicken farm. And for the most part, we don't have a lot of examples of this in Missoula County. But yeah, so, and then the next thing that we're doing to kind of make ag more accessible and viable as a livelihood is really allowing and reducing the barriers to creating ag-related businesses for a farm operation. These are businesses related to the agriculture practice that might help provide additional income, like a small farm-to-table restaurant, or a small event venue, or a retail shop to sell products. So this is kind of one strategy, and we plan to, kind of allow these accessory uses and evaluate them based on the scale of the agriculture use on the property in comparison to the scale of the proposed accessory use. So if you've got, a pretty good size farm that you're, making a good amount of money on, you can have these farm to table restaurants or an event space. But, if you're just doing, 10 square feet of lavender, you wouldn't be able to apply to have a restaurant on your property. So we're thinking about evaluating this in terms of scale. Yeah, those are our main strategies for preserving and supporting local ag. I'm now going to pass it off to Jenny to chat about some other resource protections in the code.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Drew talked about our recommendations for areas suitable for development, particularly housing and economic development opportunities. And Lindsay covered the broad expansion of our agricultural opportunities that this new code enables. I'm going to talk about those areas where development is not appropriate and ways to enable development that protects our valuable natural resources. In our coming up hearings, we will provide additional details on these elements and more of the new code, but I want to just dive into the first couple, which I think next slide would be hillside standards. We have hillside and ridgeline standards in our current zoning, some of which remains the same, but we have strengthened sections and we are still applying our hillside regulations to slopes over 10%, but now applying a different standard or a different metric for when ridgeline standards would apply, and that would be areas within 100 feet of a ridgeline that is over 3,700 feet of sea level. So that's essentially about 500 feet higher than the valley floor. We have created a pathway in the new code for lots totally encumbered by these the hillside regulations to be able to request a variance or a minor waiver so that property rights are not devalued, and allowing someone to build in a way that minimizes the impacts on that hillside but doesn't take that right away completely. The floodplain standards are intended to enhance the existing floodplain protections that we have in our floodplain regulations for those areas that are likely to be inundated with floodwaters. And this new section in zoning builds upon recommended prohibited uses in FEMA's flood manuals by prohibiting the most intensive uses through zoning. And these intensive uses are ones with the greatest potential to create water quality impacts or public safety hazards. Some examples are waste and recycling facilities, gas fueling areas, gas sales, vehicle storage, and homes on non-permanent foundations, which are likely to go downstream in an event. So the proposed zoning in floodplain areas, it also will generally keep these areas to be low intensity. But there are some areas along our rivers that have higher intensity zoning, residential, mixed use, or industrial, that this zoning will then establish some prohibited uses in those areas. Next slide, please, Drew. The riparian resource protection standards, I think there's a lot of interest in that. And in upcoming hearings, we will be talking a lot about the public and private collaborative effort to develop these new standards to protect our rivers and streams and wetlands. We worked with Water Quality District, Conservation District, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, our floodplain administrator, Clark Fork Coalition, Audubon, Five Valley Audubon, and many others. And we developed formulated recommendations for riparian protections based in part on data from FWP for buffer widths. So these new regulations establish two areas. One is a protection area and one is a buffer area. The protection area is closest to the water course. It's a fixed width. It's the most restrictive area. The buffer is added on and extending from that protection area, and it has fewer restrictions. Wetlands will not have protection areas. They will just have buffer areas. This new section focuses primarily on regulating the built environment in areas proximal to these sensitive riparian areas. And by that, I mean new buildings and structures will not be permitted within the protection area or the buffer. Maintenance is allowed in both of those areas, and limited expansion of structures will only be allowed in the buffer. And further, low intensity ag will also be permitted in both of those areas. And like the hillside section, we have built in a process for a landowner to request a minor waiver to build on a property in a way that minimizes impact to the riparian resource, but doesn't take away a development right completely. The conservation design development option, Lindsay touched on a little bit earlier. I won't go too much into that. It's a development option that awards a density bonus to developments that cluster residential development while preserving a land area set aside. And in order to qualify, the development must protect or enhance an element that contributes to public benefit. Density increases with the amount of land set aside generally, which that land area set aside can be public or private, but in either case, a landowner must establish a mechanism for permanent protection of a land area set aside using a stewardship plan. Sorry about that.
Jenny's cat's meowing, which is making my puppy freak out, and it's starting to bark.
And then next slide, last resource protection issue I want to cover with you is our clean energy incentive. And we have developed in this new code an incentive tool to meet the county's clean energy goals, which includes a 100% clean energy community-wide in approximately 8 years. So by 2030, we have to try to get Missoula community-wide 100% clean energy. We also have a goal within our government operations of carbon neutrality by 2035. So these are really important standards that we are offering as optional incentives. Nobody's going to be required to do it, but we're trying to create opportunities where people will choose to select this. So to achieve these energy conservation goals, we have proposed a number of options to conserve energy. And in exchange, the landowner may choose among several types of bonus awards. So first, I'll quickly outline those 5 options. The incentive options that someone could choose in order to get points. The first one is building energy efficiency, and this option requires reducing energy consumption in new or remodeled buildings through the application of what's called the energy use intensity model. We've talked about that previously, and I know there was a lot of discussion and probably a lot of interest, but I won't take the time here tonight. I know your meeting's going kind of late, but the second option is electrification of buildings. So rather than using fossil fuel combustion for power or heat, using electric. The third option is a renewable energy incentive, which assigns points based on the amount of renewable energy used by a development project. Fourth is solar ready project, where developments incorporate solar ready design. And the fifth is electrical vehicle charging stations. And let me just conclude this by explaining the bonuses that what someone gets for doing this. They're called bonuses. So if someone were to do one of those options, those incentives, they could choose based on the number of points they received, whether they wanted to increase residential density, increase their height, increase a building footprint or lot coverage allowance, or decrease their setbacks or parking requirements. So we've got a pretty big menu of things that people can choose that might, be incentives for them to decide to do some energy conservation with their development. And those are the resource protections among actually quite a few others, but those are the highlights. And I'll turn it back over to Drew.
All right, thank you. Yeah, for the hearing, moving on to the next topic, which is the hearing preparation. So our objective, this is our collective objective, our staff and you as the planning board together, our objective is to refine and improve the code. And we're going to do that through public comment and all of ours, our opinions and expertise. So for the format of this first meeting, the public hearing, which will be on March 1st, it's generally going to work like this. We'll do a staff presentation. It's a lot like the subdivision that we just heard. We'll do a staff presentation. We can, if the board wants to answer any or ask any questions just on the staff presentation, we can do that. But then we'll open up the public hearing. Then once the public hearing is either closed or done for the night, we can have a board discussion, and eventually the planning board will make a recommendation. So there's one thing that we haven't brought up about what will be on the hearing agenda for March 1st is, of course, the zoning code and zoning map. But there was also the recent adoption of a state law in the 2021 legislature that required the counties to put things in their growth policies in order to adopt zoning. And those things specifically are projected population densities and minimum lot size recommendations. We kind of have that in our growth policy, but it's not really super explicit. And because this is such an important topic, we want to make sure that we're defensible in that respect. So we do have a growth policy amendment to consider as well. Surprise! It's really minor. It's fairly procedural. It's just to address that state law, and it will not take much of our time. But we will be briefing you on that as well at the next meeting. We're kind of looking at it as just a procedural step. And the reason why that's happening is because we adopted our growth policy, the land use element, in 2019, and this is a law adopted in 2021. We do expect that there will be a minimum of 2 meetings. Obviously, the first meeting will probably mostly be dedicated to the public hearing. maybe we'll get through, hopefully we'll get through all the public comment at March 1st meeting. And then I do think there will be some follow-up that we'll need to work on and come back to you on the March 15th meeting. By that time, what we as staff plan to do is we plan to actually go through all of the public comment, analyze that public comment, and provide recommendations to the planning board on whether or not to address the public comment and then how. So we're going to try to make your job as reading through the public comment as easy as possible. If any of you were on the board when we did the land use element, we did the same thing. It worked really great. So plan on at least 2 meetings to get through this. It could very possibly even be more, and we've already got those on the schedule if necessary. So the planning board's role in this process, you have a specific role according to the state of Montana, and that's to hear public comment. We do expect there to be a lot of public comment. We do expect some people to be supportive and say good things. We do expect people to say constructive comments that we need to think about and maybe make changes to. And we do expect people just to be angry. But that's our role. It's your role. We have to do it. So what we're looking for you to do is to listen, to hear that public comment. And we will be listening too. But that's the legal obligation of the planning board. But what we also want is each one of you has been appointed to this board by either the city of Missoula's governing body or Missoula County's governing body, and the conservation district as well. Each one of you has, because you were appointed because you have individual perspectives that are important, that our governing bodies think are important to our community. And so your individual perspectives are also really, really important and part of your role in looking at this. So I just wanted to make that, reiterate. I think you all know that, but make that abundantly clear. So that's it. I think we're legally obligated to provide, planning board is legally obligated to provide a recommendation as well. But that's really the role. So with that, we can just have a conversation, answer questions.
Outstanding. Thank you. Sounds like Drew. You go by Drew mostly?
Either Drew, Andrew, either is totally fine. I think people, when they get to know me socially a little bit more, they call me Drew, but you feel free to call me whatever you want. I'm good.
All right. Thanks, Drew. And Lindsay and Jenny, we appreciate you guys taking the time to do such a great presentation and so informative. We'll open it up to questions here. I see Dory's got a hand up. Go ahead, Dory.
Great. Yes, I'll just echo what Sean said. Thank you guys so much. I've enjoyed now the second great presentation from you guys. 2 quick questions. One is, so we are accepting written comments on this second draft, I assume now. So do we get those, or do we just need to go look at those? How are those given to us before the hearing?
Well, what we'll do is we'll get you the comments we've received before the hearing. I think next week on Tuesday, we'll send you a packet of information so you can send along all the comments we've received at that point. And then prior to the planning board meeting or hearing, we'll probably send you some of the additional comments we've heard over the course of the week. We may not have analyzed all the comments for you at that point in time. The idea is that we might, right now we're just trying to keep our head above water with all the comments we're getting. And but we believe that by the March 15th meeting, we will have a memo for you that outlines every comment and our recommendation for it.
Great. And just a second question would be, just to clarify, because you said some things about the March 1st meeting, and I want to make sure I understand how that public hearing will work. So are you saying it's possible that night will just be the public hearing and that we may not even get through a public hearing that night? And then the March 15th would be to come back and actually then have board discussion if we don't get to it on March 1st. Am I understanding that right?
It's quite possible we might have 150 people or more that are looking to say something, and it might just take 3 hours, 4 hours just to hear them.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sean, you're muted.
Sorry, we're getting ready to do bedtime and I muted myself. Does anybody else have any questions for Andrew or Lindsay or Jenny at this time? I got a quick one here for you, and anybody can address. Could you guys explain the correlation? And I'm pretty sure you guys have explained this to us before, but between reducing parking and affordable housing, like how does that work again?
Yeah. So parking's expensive to build. It's an expensive to have. It occupies a lot of land, first of all. So you dedicate a good portion of your property to parking rather than to housing. So we could have a standard, we could have no cap on the number of units you put on a property, but if we have a really big parking requirement, it is capped because most of that property is going to get dedicated towards parking. So there have been studies that have shown that, parking costs, thousands of dollars, even in just a paved, like a lot out behind a building, thousands of dollars per space to build. And that, whether it's a rental or a purchase situation, that cost always gets passed on to the price of the home. And there's been research that shows that when you have development that doesn't have parking requirements, and then you have development that does have parking requirements, that the ones without parking always rent a little bit lower than the ones that do. So there's maybe Jenny or Lindsay have other examples, but there's a ton of literature that shows that it drives up the cost to build housing. It's kind of one of those things that we have to decide as a community. Do we want to continue to require all this parking that drives up the cost of housing, that accelerates sprawl, that continues our auto dependency, or do we want to try to break that cycle?
Great. No, that's a great reminder. That's exactly what I needed, at least. Go ahead, Jenny.
Could I just add something to that?
Please.
Just to let folks know, when we're talking about parking, reducing parking or eliminating parking, the parking eliminations are for our commercial mixed use districts and industrial districts. There will still be parking requirements for residential. They are they're proposed to be less than they are now, but lest you fear all parking will be eliminated, there still will be parking requirements for all residential.
We would love to eliminate them completely, but communities that have done that, they usually have a bit more sophistication in terms of how they manage parking than Missoula County does. They have parking commissions and parking enforcement, and so they can comprehensively manage parking in a way that we don't have the ability to. So we would love to probably wipe parking off the books entirely from our zoning code. The city of Missoula might be capable of doing that. We're not structured to. So this is a pretty comfortable place for us where we've recommended, though.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was a great reminder. Does anybody else have anything? I know we're stretching late here. All right, I am not seeing any hands up, so I think that's everything. Thank you guys so much.
Well, we really appreciate it. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be well, we're looking forward to working with you. The hearings are going to be, we're going to have some late nights together, but you guys do a great job and have great perspectives, and so we're really looking forward to hearing them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, you guys. And yeah, just a little reminder for board members. This is hasn't been as common to run this late, maybe since COVID has kicked in place. I can't really remember, but when I first joined the board, we would run to 10, 11 o'clock at night, semi-regularly. So ideally, this won't be a norm, but be prepared for some late nights. Okay, that brings us to, where are we at in the agenda here? Let me check my notes. I'm gonna have to go to the agenda online. That brings us to committee reports, and I think that is just Tung. Tung, you have a committee report from the TPCC?
I do, yeah. It's been a fun day of meetings for me. There were 3 items that were talked about. One was largely procedural. They had to amend the transportation improvement program, largely just to move some budget items around to be more in line with how they're accounting for things. The bulk of the meeting was talking about some comments. So last time there was the discussion around the new bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the MPO is going to be was putting together a bunch of comments. They are going to then write back to the Department of Transportation to give some feedback, which I think is super helpful. And then there was a small item about a letter of support around an initiative up in for up New S93 around Ronan. So pretty eventful, but got through it pretty quickly.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And definitely appreciate you attending that and, you know, meeting that standard of us being there. Appreciate that a lot, Toon, for volunteering and doing that. All right. That kind of brings us to we have old business is the next agenda item, which we don't really have any. Josh's Highway 93 update won't take place because he's not here. And so after that comes new business and referrals. So if there's anybody that has any new business or referrals or anything, now is the time to speak on that. I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't see anything and move us along to comments from board members. Is there any overall comments or anything anybody wants to say in general at this time?
Can I ask a super quick question?
Absolutely, go for it, Dory.
So just bracing myself for the March 1st hearing. I'm just wondering, do we have, in terms of, you know, being able to continue to be attentive and thoughtful as a board member, do we have any kind of limit we put on those meetings? I mean, could we go, I know city council used to go till crazy hours in the morning and they haven't with COVID, but do we cut it off at a certain time or do we just go until there's no more people wanting to speak?
That's a really good question. So we don't necessarily have any set guidelines. However, my guess is that the pre-planning meeting staff and I and Shane will probably come up with some type of limit. So if public comment, you know, off the top of my head runs us, you know, into the 11 o'clock hour, I'm going to suggest that be our threshold, maybe even 10:30. But in preparation for that, my guess is we'll kind of come up with some type of threshold. I will also probably be more strict with public comment and trying to hold people's feet to the fire. Whereas tonight I was allowing a little more leeway. So yes, ideally we'll have a threshold.
Oh, good, thanks.
Anything else from folks? Okay, with that, I am going to call tonight's meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and for being here and working so hard.
Thanks, everyone.